When would you like us to begin?
Well, I have to introduce you first.
Bienvenidos, ¿vale? Sorry, it's me again. We are very lucky to have this morning two excellent presenters to deliver the third and last of our practical workshops. First, Dr. Mary Larsson. Dr. Mary Larsson is the clinical director of the Life Center in Minneapolis, and he was a long-term collaborator with EIBI and probably the lead figure in the world nowadays. And definitely his center in Minneapolis is the flagship program of the Lovas tradition. However, he strives for innovation, and so his practice is guided by evidence and the evolution of our science. I mean, it's not that the Lovas model is some kind of a monolithic thing that cannot be changed. And he has a long-standing relationship with Spain, and he's collaborated with our second presenter today, Victor Rodriguez, for how many years? How do you guys know? Like 15 years? Yeah. Wow. And Victor is the clinical director of the Fundación Planeta Imaginario in Barcelona, which started as a replication program of the Laos study. And we are probably the most successful behavioral intervention program in Spain, both in terms of size and history. I mean, just a number of years that they've been in business. So they're really a model for others to imitate, at least in this country. And so we couldn't have, better presenters based on the credentials and experience of these two guys. So I'll leave you with them, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Eric Larsson and Victor Rodriguez. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. I've always been impressed with all of your work in so many different fields, and I have to read your papers about 8 times through before I begin to understand all of the statistical treatments. So I look forward to, as we present our outcome data today, it's a work in progress. We haven't finished summarizing it, checking all the data for reliability. And I look forward to learning more from Javier on how we might statistically treat our outcomes.
Maybe in your belt? Your belt?
Maybe just leave it. Okay. People hear me all right?
You can put it in your pocket too.
Okay. So I serve on the Behavior Analyst Certification Board based in Denver, Colorado. And one thing that we're emphasizing as the new ethical standards have come out is that in our presentations, we should have the standard disclosure of financial and material interests that really is standard, I think, in the medical field and perhaps in others. And we're promoting to all certified behavior analysts but they also continue to provide the same statement of potential conflict of interest when they present. So obviously I'll be presenting data, but it's data based on the services that I'm providing, and I'm remunerated for that work. So you can take that as a grain of salt. Our program today is about the research we're conducting in our early intensive behavioral intervention program based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. We actually no longer use the term the Life Center, so we always refer to ourselves now as the Lovaas Institute Midwest. And I also teach at the University of Minnesota. And Victor was introduced by Javier. And then the Kara Riedessel has also worked in our program for many, many years, going back to the 1990s, and just completed her degree in speech language pathology. And a lot of the solidity of our data can be attributed to Kara's efforts at quality control in our program. So when we talk about what is the current model of the Lovaas Institute, Javier put it very well. It's not a monolithic fixed program. I was impressed all along as I interacted with Dr. Lovaas starting in the 1980s, 1990s and 2000s, and all of the practitioners at UCLA and the replication sites. There's always been a focus on embracing the entire field of applied behavior analysis and using the best and most current methods in our treatments. So there is no model that one can easily write in a single chapter. This is exactly how all children are treated. In fact, the treatment is highly individualized, as well as continuing to follow the innovations. The early intervention, as Javier was noting, the age at start of treatment is an important feature that does moderate the outcomes of what we do. And the intensive intervention is also an important feature, but one often misunderstood aspect of what we do is that Lovaas's 1987 study reported an average of 40 hours a week of treatment, which varied across the duration of each individual child's treatment from less than 5 hours a week to over 60 hours a week. Much of it was what was called co-therapy, where a senior and a senior therapist, student therapist, would be working with a child simultaneously. And both of those hours would be documented. And also Lovaas's 1987 study, as I point out later in chart, also had a high degree of clinical supervision on a weekly basis, also delivered directly to the family, as well as parent training delivered directly to the family. And those hours weren't documented, so those were in addition to that average of 40. The focus on best outcomes, as articulated by Lovaas in 1987, leads us always to address comprehensively all of the features of a child's autism and all the features of a child's developmental delay or behavioral or handicaps of any nature. We also, because of our focus is really on all of the treatment of a child with autism, we're training the parents to be able to use the most effective strategies at any given minute of the 24-hour day and 7-day week. And that's a key component of the effectiveness, as is also often overlooked in overall reviews of early intervention. And then also, as we'll be talking about our focus on program management and staff training and parent training through what we call dynamic programming, and also on our accountability to both the parents and the funders. So what is it that a child is likely to experience in our model? And what is it that the team of therapists and the parents are likely to experience as a child proceeds through treatment? I'll be showing you some overall data on the characteristics of our treatment shortly, but I wanted to introduce a fair picture of what treatment is like for us. Our average length of treatment for children starting in their preschool years, and the average length of treatment is about 3 years. But the treatment model is reevaluated every 6 months. And so some children are done in 1 year, and some children take up to 5 years or longer to complete treatment. But on average, treatment proceeds across 3 years of time, and the behavior therapy that we deliver is balanced across all the diagnostic features of autism: their behavior, their language, and their social skills and social interactions. And just as importantly, balanced across the training of the parents and training of the staff, because as children progress, even seasoned staff need training on the higher and more sophisticated levels of treatment that the children are then going to be experiencing. And the key, I think, hub of therapy is reinforcement. That 90%, I believe 90% of the effectiveness of what we do is based on using effective schedules of reinforcement. And so therefore, across the 3 main phases of treatment, the foundational phase, where we're teaching basic skills such as imitation and matching and compliance and operant vocalization, we're teaching those skills that then we are going to use to then teach the more elaborate basic skills of child development. So we're going to take the imitation skills and the compliance skills, the operant reinforcement of language, and then take those mastered skills to use as prompts and as behavioral momentum for teaching the children their language and play skills and self-control of their challenging behaviors throughout the day. And then in a third phase, and I should say this is not lockstep, that everything's done here and then we move to everything here. But in the third phase of treatment, we're naturalizing the child's program, where this may seem more the artificial, traditional thought of what a discrete trial looks like. And this is more what the natural environment therapy looks like, where we're really making sure we're teaching the child to respond to peers, develop mutual friendships, respond in natural classrooms, and respond throughout the day and week in the community. And so again, going back to this first process throughout those phases, we're talking about what is the reinforcement schedule, what's the optimum reinforcement schedule to use for all the different behaviors that we are targeting for the child, and what is the quality of the reinforcers we should be using. So our team in their planning is planning every week to improve and modify the reinforcement technology that's being used with the child. And if we lose sight of modifying the reinforcement we use, then our therapy often does become rote and or counter-functional. In addition to that, and I use the term self-control almost as a nod to the lay public, but we're certainly making sure that we're identifying what are the challenging behaviors that are interfering with a child's cognitive development, and ensuring that our reinforcement is being delivered to control those challenging behaviors. And that's a process, again, that should be progressing throughout all the weeks of therapy throughout the 3 years. And then also what's very important is that we've learned is observational learning is really a cornerstone of normal function. That a typical child is starting with basic training and imitation skills. That imitation is getting more and more elaborate into learning to imitate larger and larger chunks of behavior. But then to be able to go into novel environments, like a novel kindergarten playground, and immediately detect what is going on in this very chaotic environment and learn from watching the other children play. So the other children may be playing their own unique version of football, as you actually see when you start going to kindergarten, first grade to first grade, you see a different version of sports game in every playground in the world. And children all automatically learn those weird rules for that normal activity. So we want to make sure we're building our child's ability to develop observational learning skills and do that automatically. So simultaneously, we're focused on what is the operant reinforcement? What is the reinforcement? Am I loud? Thank you. Is that any better? Hopefully. The operant reinforcement, again, the Lobos model has often been thought of as synonymous with more of a compliant receptive approach. But we start right at the very beginning in treatment with reinforcing vocalization, any vocalization, whether or not it appears functional, just to establish a high rate of vocal behavior in the child's life, and then start shaping that to more and more commands and other purposeful functional vocal language. And so that should continue throughout the course of treatment. And then the more obvious structured discrete trial approach, it should also be continuing to become more and more elaborate, more and more complex as treatment progresses. And the language should always be generalized. So if I've taught the child something in a face-to-face situation on the floor, the child should be able to master that skill in any generalized similar situation. Simultaneously, we're gradually moving from very structured to very complex social skills and social interactions, and making sure that these skills that we're building in what appears to be more of a discrete trial structured format are being generalized to very natural social activities, so that a child who's learning social interaction skills with staff is also showing those same skills at a family dinner at a holiday. Excuse me. So as I said, the parent training is critical because even if we are delivering a 40-hour-a-week program, there's 168 hours in a week. And any multi-element design comparing 40 hours of accurate reinforcement with 128 hours of misplaced reinforcers is going to show that the parents' misplaced reinforcers are much more effective than the staff's accurate 40 hours of therapy. So we train the parents right away on all these skills in structured training with a therapist, in cooperative work together in vivo with the child. Train the parents on what is extremely common in the child's environment is all the self-care needs, ensuring that we're gaining compliance and patient responding in all the self-care activities of life. And then emphasizing to the parents, once they have skills learned in more of a discrete trial format, to generalize those skills and follow through with high expectations throughout the child's life. And again, the point of this graph is this should always be modifying. What we've taught the parents to do 2 months ago should now be something different if the child's making progress. And the staff, again, we are in a situation where there's high staff turnover. We're working with staff who are college students and fresh out of college. They don't have the sophistication themselves to deliver treatment and design treatment. And they don't have the sophistication to modify their practices as the child progresses, or to troubleshoot their practices as the child runs into barriers and we need to work through them. So the model of data that I'm going to show is based on all of this effort that we're modifying on a weekly, 6-month, and even a daily basis as we work with a child. Now,
did you say that one of the features of the program is to have personnel with a high turnover to the students?
It's what we're stuck with.
Okay.
We have, we serve about 60 children in Minneapolis right now, and we have about 80 staff.
Yeah.
And we probably lose 15 of those every year and hire brand new staff to replace them every year. So that's a high rate of turnover. It's every single child's program. The team usually is composed of about 6 persons. And every year, every child is likely to have at least one new staff person who has no familiarity with that child. This child is nonverbal. This child has extremely aggressive and hyperactive behavior, and this child's very calm, and also has a sophisticated verbal skills. When staff move from one team to another, they may have no preparation whatsoever to follow through confidently with that new child. So the staff training is critical.
Yeah.
Now, our presentation today, to your great benefit, is we're going to be switching back and forth between myself and my very calm presentation to Victor Rodriguez's very expansive presentation. And he also, being a native Spanish speaker, will translate what I was just talking about every so many minutes. We'll stop and Victor will then spend perhaps 5 minutes translating and being more exciting than I was. So here's a good opportunity for Victor to jump in and review what I just covered.
Okay. Bueno, te empiezas sentado, ¿vale? I'm going to briefly explain in Spanish what was explained, what you said. Bueno, básicamente, cuando hablamos del modelo LOGAS, actualmente no podemos estar hablando de un modelo cerrado que podamos escribir en un libro y la aplicación del modelo sea exactamente lo que ese libro dice. Sabemos que la alta individualización de los niños dentro del espectro del autismo nos exigen operar de forma muy individualizada. De lo contrario, va a ser muy difícil afrontar los retos que nos presentan cada uno de los niños. Sabemos, el doctor Larsson ha estado explicando un poco cuáles son las variables de la intervención. No me quiero alargar aquí porque seguramente casi todos conocéis la práctica en el modelo LOGAS, pero sí que habla y en estudios extremadamente revisado la importancia del inicio temprano. Por ejemplo, cuando habla de los estudios del doctor Robas, también habla de la necesidad de alta especialización por parte de los supervisores para desarrollar programas y para la toma de decisiones clínicas semanal y mensualmente. Otro de los aspectos que habla desde el punto de vista de descripción del modelo, habla sobre el enfoque comprensivo, cubriendo todas las áreas del desarrollo, no únicamente áreas específicas relacionadas a lo mejor con lenguaje, sino cubriendo todas las áreas y a partir de ahí la necesidad de trabajar con los padres. Uno de los aspectos que comenta en diferentes momentos es el hecho de la necesidad de todo lo que estamos trabajando en situaciones de aprendizaje con terapeutas, cualquier habilidad la necesitamos llevar a situaciones naturales, situaciones donde la familia debe aprender cómo enseñar a trabajar con su hijo, cómo aprender a cómo enseñar a su hijo para poderlo llevar a situaciones lo más naturalizadas posibles. Por otro lado, otro de los aspectos que comenta el doctor Larsson y que creo que están como directamente relacionadas con el primer punto sobre la dificultad de escribir un modelo de intervención para niños con autismo que sea aplicable a todos, es ese concepto de programación dinámica. Al final, todos sabemos que muchas veces para trabajar una misma habilidad con diferentes niños necesitamos casi utilizar procesos completamente opuestos, porque necesitamos entender que tan dinámica es la conducta de un niño, tan cambiante, tan flexible puede ser, es como tiene que ser tan cambiante nuestros procedimientos de aprendizaje. Entonces, desde un punto de vista de esta programación dinámica, de esta posición sobre el análisis aplicado al comportamiento, Eric lo que comenta es que, bueno, generalmente en promedio las intervenciones pueden ser, en términos de duración, pueden ser muy variables, nos podemos mover entre 1 año y 5 años, creo que el promedio estaría sobre unos 3 años, pero lo importante y uno de los aspectos que intentamos seguir mucho es reiniciar la intervención cada 6 meses. Luego también el doctor Larsson estará explicando cuáles son los procesos de evaluación que seguimos e independientemente de la evaluación total de la intervención, sí que estos periodos semestrales nos ayudan a reorientar y a diseñar la programación de forma constante. Por otro lado, insistir en el equilibrio necesario entre el entrenamiento de padres y el entrenamiento del equipo. Uno de los aspectos que he contado al final es que, bueno, de 168 horas que tiene la semana, si solo estamos trabajando unas 40, hay 40 horas en las que los terapeutas están trabajando en programas de refuerzo supuestamente correctos. Si el niño está a un total de 128 horas aproximadamente a la semana con los padres en un programa de refuerzo completamente diferente, es muy probable que la efectividad sobre los procedimientos disminuya un montón, simplemente por un criterio de definición de contingencia básico. Entonces, entrando ya en las diapositivas donde están los colorines de los triángulos, sí que explica, perdóname, me iré calentando un poco, pero sí que explica que, obviamente, desde el punto de las fases de la terapia, el aspecto clave siempre va a ser el reforzador y el manejo del reforzador. Creo que es uno de los aspectos más difíciles desde el punto de vista de la implementación consistente y sistemática de una aproximación tan intensiva. Es verdad que el reforzador va a estar presente y debe estar presente de forma efectiva siempre, pero necesitamos establecer unas habilidades previas que realmente nos ayuden a siempre llegar a una situación naturalizada, siempre a una situación de generalización. Al final, el aprendizaje no generalizado, el aprendizaje que no se demuestra en situación naturalizada, es un aprendizaje poco efectivo, es un aprendizaje que difícilmente se va a mantener y que tanto partir de una estructura fija de reforzador y buscar y llevar esos aprendizajes a la situación naturalizada también con los resultados naturalizados. ¿Estoy hablando muy rápido? Vale. Me queda poquito, y dejo al doctor Larsson. Uno de los aspectos que también comentaba el doctor Larsson desde el punto de vista de autocontrol, ahí siempre vamos a estar buscando qué es aquello que está interfiriendo en el desarrollo del aprendizaje en el niño. ¿Qué es lo que nos está dificultando el hecho de que el niño pueda estar aprendiendo una nueva habilidad? Por eso, el trabajo del autocontrol en momentos iniciales, donde vamos a sentar las fases del aprendizaje, es algo también importante. Desde un punto de vista de comportamiento, también hace referencia al aprendizaje observacional. Al final, necesitamos aprender y aprender a generalizar para poder llevar una práctica naturalizada. Al final, en esencia, lo que necesitamos hacer es enseñar a que los niños aprendan por sí solos, ser capaces de que el niño no necesite un entrenamiento para cualquier cosa. El doctor Larsson pone el ejemplo de los niños jugando a fútbol, donde en realidad sí, obviamente se les puede enseñar a los niños a jugar a fútbol, pero al final, gracias a esa práctica y a esa habilidad completamente generativa que tienen los niños para poder imitar, es como mayoritariamente aprenden habilidades complejas. Con respecto al tema del lenguaje, uno de los aspectos importantes que dices, como si bien podemos hacer mucho énfasis en todo el abordaje del lenguaje receptivo en fases iniciales, sí que es verdad que necesitamos intentar establecer refuerzo operante sobre las vocalizaciones para intentar potenciar desde muy al principio aspectos de imitación verbal y control de las vocalizaciones que puede hacer el niño.
Sí, tengo una pregunta. Mencionáis mucho lo de las verbalizaciones. ¿Cuál es vuestra posición respecto a otros sistemas de comunicación, como PECs o lenguaje de signos?
Se lo pregunto a él, ¿no? Pregúntaselo a él. En inglés. No, pero es como...
You mentioned, or you emphasized in the language section, the verbalization factor. But I don't know what is your opinion about other communication systems, such as PECs or sign language.
The question was what my opinion is of other communication systems like PECs or augmentative communication electronic systems on the iPad, for example. We individualize our program for each child. Our ideal model would be teaching the child to vocalize and vocally imitate the skills that we're modeling. But we very rapidly, for children who appear to be making slow progress in vocal imitation training, we very rapidly normally incorporate either PECs on a cardboard system or on the iPad as the second best choice. Historically, we would use manual signing, which we still have children who we've decided that's an easier mode of communication for them than using an electronic system that they're distracted by or a PEC system that doesn't work for one reason or another. So we're very quick to individualize to the optimal length communication mode, and then actually hope with PECs always to generalize the picture exchange of the cardboard to requiring the child to vocalize at the same time and then fade out those two-dimensional stimuli. Were you done, Victor, and took the question, or should I hand this back to you?
Go ahead.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I was so excited for you to see Victor hopping around on stage, and he sits down. Do you have an answer for that?
No. Go ahead.
So maybe I'll have to hop around just because. So to give you also a better sense, almost to correct some misunderstandings of our model, I'm going to jump from the beginning of treatment, which many people have more of an understanding of, to the end of treatment to set the stage for where we're headed. You know, and the classic metaphor is I could hand you a treatment manual, here's what you do, and that's like a road map. So all the roads and all the landmarks are on the map, but where are you going? You can't use the road map unless you know where you're headed with the map. As I've learned here in Cadiz, perhaps you still don't know where you're going, even when you have both the map and the destination. But so us a main obvious destination for the treatment of autism is social comprehension. Does the child comprehend social situations and use appropriate receptive and expressive language skills in a natural way in those contexts? Again, when we look at the current DSM-5 diagnosis of autism, and you look through the section on social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts, it's very clear that a child that has not had these deficits fully remediated would still qualify for the diagnosis of autism. And our goal is to reach best outcomes or optimal outcomes. And I'll back up and mention that for a second. In Lobos's 1987 study, his measures of best outcomes were, one, that the child loses their diagnosis, two, that they were able to enter and graduate from a grade in school without requiring one-to-one treatment in the classroom, and three, that they reach normal IQ functioning. So for us to aspire to that same goal with as many children as possible, we want to remediate all of these diagnostic features of autism. And social comprehension is a way to do that. But what we see often in other ABA approaches to the treatment of autism is addressing feelings and emotions as more of a rote activity way early in the sequence of treatment, whereas we're addressing it at the end of treatment. And you see, for example, many people will teach children to label emotions, and this is a study that was not necessarily targeting remediation of autism, but here's actual slides of emotion recognition from this study in the development of emotion recognition in individuals with autism. And when I look at these slides, I can't identify them. We see the key from the paper is explaining that A is happy, and B is sad, C is afraid, D is angry, E is disgusted, and F is surprised. All emotions that we would expect children can comprehend and identify. But simply looking at faces is often a non-functional approach to emotion recognition from our point of view. We also have work by Simon Baron-Cohen, and here are samples from the assessment published in the New York Times as kind of an activity. So simply focusing on, can you identify from eyes how these people are feeling? And I'm simply showing you these slides as an example of how non-functional this kind of labeling activity seems to be. But there are many of these kinds of studies that are primarily focused either on emotion recognition or facial recognition. And I chose not to try to integrate movies here, but this is a very funny YouTube video. This boy looking at this single frozen in time 2D stimulus of this boy, one might agree he's probably happy, but actually what's amusing about the YouTube video is he's trying to talk his mother into giving him some kind of reinforcement, and he's very frustrated. He's saying, Linda, you don't understand. And but at any given moment, it's very hard to understand what his emotions are based on the picture. And even more interestingly, this is the original Pixar animated video where they were able to use curves in their animation. And this is an entire short, it's 4 or 5 minutes long, with a mother lamp and a baby lamp, and the baby's playing with a ball and gets frustrated with the ball, and the mother helps the ball, and the mother then shakes her head and how amusing her child is. No faces whatsoever. but it's very easy, and I talked to the Disney animators, it's very easy to understand the emotions that are being represented by the context, by the continuous interplay of actions and the postures that these two individuals are using. And yet it's universally understood in a way that those emotion recognition faces aren't. So we'll talk more in detail about our language matrix analysis of our curriculum in a moment, but what we've done with our language matrix analysis is build a sequential task analysis of starting with very simple receptive and expressive tasks and moving into more complex social, conversational and comprehension and productive language tasks, ultimately leading to social comprehension. And I'm going to stay on this topic of social comprehension. We emphasize throughout the language matrix, the main target is always generative language. So anything that I teach, the child should immediately be able to generalize to an alternate exemplar. So at the very basic level, if I'm teaching the child to label a tree, I can show him a novel tree he's never been prompted to label, and he can call that a tree. At a more complex level, if I show him a concept, so I'm showing him fast as a verb, he can generalize to anything that he sees, and he can say whether it's fast or slow without direct prompting necessary. And when I move into sentences, we work on recombinative generalization. So if I'm showing, I'll show you some of this later, if I'm teaching the child to label a red ball and a blue cup, then I show him a stick, a brown stick, and he can immediately recombine the colors with the objects to label using all the mastered component skills and label these matrix representations of sentences. But everything, our goal is always generative, that if we taught that the child can respond to novel stimuli in novel settings without prompting. And going back to the 1970s as a major focus of applied behavior analysis, language interventions. So when we look at social comprehension, we want to be able to teach the child to respond to novel stimuli, again, without prompting. So within this same format of watching the movie Toy Story, can the child understand the different social concepts that he's seeing in these different stimuli, again, without prompting? If I have to teach the child to understand the stimuli in the movie Toy Story, then I want him to be able to generalize automatically to the movie Lego Batman and be able to recognize similar kinds of emotional concepts automatically. And these may be two-dimensional, or they may be three-dimensional, or it may be the child acting out these social concepts. They should be able to recognize the humor that we take for granted in movies, or in books, or in play with their friends, or on YouTube, in all the normal modes that we typically interact in. And so again, we may be teaching the child to respond to social stimuli with repeated practice and fading out prompts of one scenario. And now we're at, and I'm moving ahead just to give you a sense of our goal. We're at the end of treatment. We're able to teach the child's social comprehension through direct prompting with these stimuli, but we want the child to generalize to novel stimuli. without requiring prompting. So what are these generative social comprehension concepts that we're teaching? We actually have a list of about 72 concepts that are common in kindergarten and first grade. And here's a sample of a few of them. These are concepts that you see in these movies, you see in books, you see in the classroom when the teacher's discussing a book or an activity with other children. So more of the social comprehension concepts we're going to be teaching. And when I going back to the concept of generative responding, we may teach a child using pictures to understand the social comprehension concept that we're teaching, but then we want him to generalize to listening to a story and making correct social comprehension responses, reading a story, watching a movie or a video, watching a video book, and at some point expect we no longer have to keep teaching in all these various modes. The child will automatically generalize to an alternate mode. And no, we're always moving towards real life performance. So he can watch us role play a social comprehension concept and then label correctly. He can listen to a conversation and label what we were talking about, but then he himself can act out the social comprehension activity and ultimately respond appropriately in a real life situation. So what we also emphasize in our matrix curriculum is that there are a variety of modes that the children need to be able to generalize across. So I was showing this 2D or video mode earlier. We also obviously will have flashcards, and do children look at these and label correctly. And you can see, going back to my earlier complaint, these flashcards are not portraying a social situation very accurately, nor are they stickers, although you can identify, well, they're all happy. But we want the children to be able to generalize to labeling three-dimensional toys and performing correctly. We want them to be able to engage in dramatic play with three-dimensional toys, construct with three-dimensional toys, again, generalize from one toy to another, generalize to the iPad apps that also have social concepts embedded. They will act out in a play. This is a typical situation that any family would construct in their house for their child with autism. Being silly. But what you'll certainly see is the children dressing up, and can they act out the social comprehension play that they saw in the movie? And can the staff and parents dress up and act out the social comprehension? Can they generalize to the playground? Generalize to the bounce house? Again, we want to make sure that we're not just teaching in one rote format, like at a table with flashcards is anathema to what we're attempting to do. We're attempting to teach with sufficient exemplars to generalize to any natural activity in the child's life. So I've been going quickly through what social comprehension really means. And here you see examples of the kinds of comprehension questions that are asked during the social comprehension. So if I'm teaching the child to recognize the social comprehension concepts in Toy Story 3, I would stop at a scene that he's just watched, and I can ask him, what does Barbie want? Why does she want that? How does Barbie feel? Why does Barbie feel that way? What could you do for Barbie? Why would you do that? What do you think will happen next? Why do you think that'll happen next? What would you do if you were Barbie? Why would you do that? How can you tell what you're telling me? How do you know? Why is that funny? a child, if I've taught the child to respond to Toy Story 1, now I'm showing him Toy Story 3, or now I'm showing him Lego Batman, the child should at some point reach unprompted competence with this kind of comprehension, and with a real goal of being able to act out appropriately these kinds of social comprehension skills. So there are many generative materials to rely upon. There are many book series that are also now video series that we can use. The YouTube and Google searches are becoming even more elaborate with filters that can quickly find the concepts we're looking for. There are online curriculums being published frequently, such as sarahsimplicity.com, that are searchable for keywords. There are also many books, and we've got quite a list now of books, say, for example, under the concept of sharing. These are 4 very commonly recommended by librarian books for young children on the concept of sharing. So again, we may be teaching the one book, and then we're going to probe for generalization to a completely different book, and then maybe reteach there, and then probe to the third book. So here's an example of a study that we did on teaching generative social comprehension, to get right back to the individual ABA data. So this is a single child's data, child number 1, and this is his percentage of correct responses to social comprehension questions on the first probe with a novel book or novel social scenario. So this is a multiple baseline design, and there's 5 social concepts being taught: sharing, winning and losing, being bossy, being left out, and determination. And at baseline, and this is the child, say at his 3rd year of treatment, I'll show you that in a second. He's about less than 60% correct on determination, perhaps 30% correct on being left out. Then as a multiple probe design, then repeating probes prior to implementing the social comprehension training. The children are making slight progress, perhaps, or not in each area, but then during training, they go up to reach our criterion of 80% correct on a novel probe without prompting fairly quickly for each skill. And then maintain that with novel, as we continue to teach other social comprehension skills, maintain that 80% correct with novel stimuli across the remainder of the study. And that's child 1. Child 2, you all know most of these are social comprehension questions with a 2D or 3D stimulus alone, but the open circles are responding in an actual real-life social scenario, either a role play or an actual real-life situation. And here's subject 3's performance. To put this in the context of our language matrix curriculum, here we see at baseline, the child, this first row of columns is the child at intake, and then the second row of columns is 4 months into treatment. The green row is 15 months into treatment. And what we're working on early with this child, and this was subject 1, or participant 1, just quickly going back to remind you, it's the one I talked through. Going back to this first slide. Doing a great job keeping up with me. So here the child at baseline, this is our matrix, and I'll go into more detail later, but 1 term responding, 2 term conditional discriminations, 3-term sentences, 4-term sentences, the number of skills in our curriculum that he has mastered at baseline, then at 4 months, at 15 months, at 21 months, at 27 months, and you see what's noted up here, the social comprehension program, he wasn't ready for until he reached 41 months. So not until between the 39-month data and the 44-month had he mastered enough of the prerequisites to address social comprehension. And we'll talk also about the learning accomplishment profile that we use to estimate. So I'm just using this slide to explain further the last one. We use the learning accomplishment profile, which I'll go into more detail with later, to estimate their developmental ratio. So if I divide their average months of development by their age, so 63 months of assessed development on the left, by his chronological age, 82.5 months, that ratio is 76. So that's like a normal developmental ratio would be 100. And so he, at the start of treatment, he's not quite at the normal range yet. I'm backing up to him. And you can see at baseline, this child, his developmental ratio was a 65. And at discharge, his developmental ratio was 100. And he was up to an 85 when we initiated the social comprehension treatment. And then we'll, jumping forward, participant 2, a different pattern, almost zero skills at baseline, language-wise, developing those skills, able to start the social comprehension curriculum at 26 months of treatment, when his DRI was 100, moving overall treatment from a DRI of 56 to 98. That's the developmental ratio index. And then the third child, initiating social comprehension again at 23 months of treatment after mastering most of these prerequisites, when his developmental ratio was 66. And at discharge, his developmental ratio had only reached the 71, but he was mastering those social comprehension tasks. So there are other generative social comprehension studies in the literature, some of which with our staff that have left us, causing turnover and moved on to other programs. These studies are replicating this concept that we can teach children through multiple exemplars to recognize and perform appropriately socially. I'm going to stop and give Victor a chance to not jump around or jump around as your choice. And but I'll let him maybe go back here. You can decide whatever slide you want to leave it on, or
Yeah, it would be easier for me to explain. Yeah.
This, lo que expliqué ahí es, voy para atrás, bastante para atrás. Saldré rápido, ¿eh? No.
Take you a while.
Pues, lo que decía Eric al respecto es, bueno, vamos a tratar desde...
now we have to escape. Actually, go up to them.
Saltamos desde la explicación básica del modelo de la intervención individualizada al punto final, ¿no? El aspecto de comprensión social. Al final, como decía él, por mucho que tengamos un libro, por mucho que tengamos un manual, es difícil el poder seguir una ruta si no sabemos de dónde partimos, si no sabemos a dónde queremos llegar. Y uno de los aspectos que él menciona sobre el doctor Roa, sobre los criterios del doctor Roa en su investigación son tres: la pérdida del diagnóstico, la escolarización en contextos completamente normalizados y la no necesidad de intervención uno a uno. Es verdad que en muchas ocasiones se ha intentado trabajar sobre aspectos de emociones y de sentimientos a través de la enseñanza del reconocimiento, pero simplemente el reconocimiento no es suficiente. Este tipo de tareas, aquí es cuando ponía como varios ejercicios, este tipo de tareas son tareas bastante poco funcionales, donde en realidad, por ejemplo, en muchas ocasiones, en este ejemplo donde este es un vídeo realmente conocido, donde aquí el niño parece estar un niño feliz y que la emoción podría ser la de estar feliz, pero en realidad lo que está haciendo es una situación frustrante para el niño donde le está pidiendo a su madre algo de comer, creo que es, donde realmente, más allá del reconocimiento, lo que está pasando, la comprensión social va mucho más allá del simplemente reconocimiento de una cara. Por ejemplo, habla de este clip donde en realidad son dos lámparas, donde no hay caras, donde eventualmente la emoción sería difícilmente reconocible, pero perfectamente entendiendo el contexto, identificando estímulos concretos en el contexto, podemos ver perfectamente la emoción que tienen las dos lámparas al interactuar. Entonces, uno de los aspectos que habla como aspecto importante desde el punto de vista de la comprensión social es el concepto de respuesta generativa. Al final, cuando en el desarrollo de la matriz del lenguaje, el doctor Larsson ha trabajado mucho y sigue trabajando en su desarrollo. Al final, estamos intentando construir de forma muy cuidadosa cuáles son los diferentes procedimientos, los diferentes conceptos que el niño tiene que seguir aprendiendo para poder llegar a un punto en el que cualquier cosa que le queremos enseñar, el niño sea capaz de responder en situaciones nuevas sin ningún tipo de apoyo y ante cualquier ejemplar nuevo. Eso es lo que queremos que pase en la situación social. Lo que necesitamos para la comprensión social ya no es tanto que el niño aprenda a responder en unas determinadas situaciones, sino que naturalmente él pueda responder de forma generativa entre personas nuevas, situaciones nuevas, sin ningún tipo de dificultad. Lo que él habla desde el punto del lenguaje es como, bueno, si un niño, entrenamos a que un niño reconozca una pelota roja, un coche azul, lo que queremos al final de todo ya no es que el niño nos cueste poco enseñarle, sino que llega un momento en el que él, por él mismo, sin ningún entrenamiento, está respondiendo completamente solo. Y básicamente lo que sigue haciendo énfasis habla de 72 habilidades como relativamente básicas que en términos de comprensión social que se pueden trabajar en un contexto de educación infantil. Entonces, bueno, poner los diferentes ejemplares sobre que el reconocimiento de la emoción o de la sensación va mucho más allá simplemente de algunas caras, sino simplemente el reconocimiento de todo el contexto. Perdón, muy bien, ¿eh? Bueno, es que no quiero explicar todo. Esos son los diferentes ejemplares para la comprensión social. Entonces, aquí estos son los conceptos que lo comentan. Entonces, uno de los aspectos de cara a promover una respuesta generativa desde el punto de vista de comprensión social pasa por entender que en la habilidad social igual que cuando trabajamos un reconocimiento de un objeto, un color, pues el niño tiene que ser capaz de reconocerlo en cualquier formato, en cualquier modo de respuesta, tanto si es en 3D como es en 2D. Es exactamente igual para la habilidad social. Necesitamos ser capaces de que un niño no solo sea capaz de responder a preguntas sobre una escena, sino que a lo mejor necesitamos entrenar la respuesta a esa pregunta y llevaremos a respuestas, a entrenar respuestas a preguntas de otras escenas, pero necesitamos estar asegurando que el niño es capaz de responder ante cualquier situación nueva. Pero eso no quiere decir que no necesita que el niño tenga que ser capaz de demostrarlo tanto en un juego con muñecos o en una situación en vivo. Ahí es lo que vamos a entender como respuesta generativa, no solo respuestas a una película o en una situación en 2D, sino que vamos a buscar que el niño sea capaz de hacerlo en un 3D y en un vivo. Ahí es el concepto de respuesta generativa a través de todos los formatos para cualquiera de las habilidades. Entonces, con respecto a los datos que el doctor Larsson presenta, voy a las gráficas. Pone 3 ejemplos sobre procesos en los que buscamos como respuesta generativa en los niños, desde situaciones que el niño tiene un rendimiento relativamente bajo hasta situaciones donde buscamos la respuesta generativa para diferentes habilidades sociales como compartir, ganar y perder, como jefe, ¿no? Es como mandar a los otros, mandón. Entonces, aquí, bueno, me quiero ir a las gráficas porque me parece, pues, uno de los aspectos que explica el doctor Larsson es en la matriz del lenguaje, cuando empezamos a hablar de un término, de los términos como partículas verbales en las cuales vamos construyendo de forma cuidadosa. Uno de los aspectos importantes es que en nuestra práctica seguramente todo lo que tiene que ver con la comprensión social empieza bastante tarde. Es decir, si os fijáis, lo que el doctor Larsson explica es como la comprensión social con este niño empieza tras 44 meses de intervención, donde la cantidad de habilidades desde un punto de vista verbal es muy grande. Ahí cuando él explica, si os fijáis arriba, la comprensión social iniciada a los 41 meses, cuando el índice de desarrollo está en 85. Es decir, aquí lo que él explica es, este índice de desarrollo lo sacamos del producto entre la edad cronológica y la edad de desarrollo. Lo que quiere decir es que donde el punto típico estaría sobre los 100 con una desviación de 15 puntos. Lo que quiere decir es que cuando con ese niño empezamos a trabajar, entramos en la comprensión social cuando ese niño ya está puntuando 85 en el índice de desarrollo. Lo que quiere decir es como, ya no es solo, quizá antiguamente o hace unos años estamos trabajando sobre la respuesta en ruta, muy temprana, cuando el niño tenía a lo mejor no mucho lenguaje generativo sobre el reconocimiento de emociones, sobre el reconocimiento de expresiones faciales, la imitación de expresiones faciales, entendiéndolo como comprensión social. Vamos a poder llegar a respuestas generativas si el niño tiene un repertorio suficientemente grande sobre la respuesta generativa. Entonces, con respecto desde aquí muestran los diferentes perfiles de niños, ¿no? Lo mismo es, con este niño empiezan a los 26 meses de intervención, pero cuando su índice de desarrollo ya está en 100. Lo que, fijaos de nuevo ese concepto de vamos a trabajar sobre la habilidad social cuando el niño tiene un repertorio suficiente como para poder aprender. Al final, es lo mismo que pasa con el niño típico. Cuando un niño típico empieza a aprender habilidades sociales, cuando tiene mucho repertorio verbal de imitación, donde la respuesta generativa, o dicho de otra forma, donde la necesidad de enseñar específicamente algunas habilidades es nulo porque el niño lo está aprendiendo solo. Esto creo que es un aspecto importante de todo el trabajo del doctor Larsson. Aquí lo mismo, ¿eh? El tercer niño, pues os fijáis, tras 23 meses empieza la comprensión social, pero con un índice de desarrollo de 66 a 66. Y ese es uno de los puntos en los que creo que el doctor Larsson pone mucho énfasis siempre sobre la respuesta generativa en habilidades previas. Y sí que es verdad que tenemos mucha prisa en llegar a la comprensión social. Sí que es verdad que tenemos mucha prisa porque ese niño esté funcionando de forma generativa en contextos sociales, pero hay muchas veces que cuando no lo conseguimos es porque seguramente el niño no tiene capacidad de respuesta generativa suficiente en habilidades muy previas. Por lo cual, en el salto a la situación natural, a la situación social, el niño falla por esta ausencia de previas. Así de rápido, más o menos. Los que entendéis castellano e inglés, van muy bien, ¿no? Si queréis clarificar algo, no hay ningún problema.
And I think now it's time for us to take our first break. And how long would you like to structure that for? For a 5 to 10 minute break? Thank you. Okay, so I'll start talking again. So approximately half of our children enter, and you saw some different intake data, although I didn't cover those graphs for the social comprehension as detailed as I could have, but you saw one child that had virtually no language skills at intake, although he accelerated quickly, and other children start with a lot of language skills at intake. It's maybe 50-50 in our program. So how do we get it? Our goal is to get there to social comprehension in natural environments with all of our children. What's the task analysis that we use to get there? So we've reorganized that traditional Logos curriculum, again, to include all the good ideas from different ABA research, and also make sure that we're generalizing from what is often the overly structured tabletop kind of task, which isn't even desirable, to all the forms of play and natural social interaction. And we call the entire curriculum now the language matrix curriculum. So I've got this slide here so you can read all of the aspects of the language matrix, and now Victor will read it all for you.
Language matrix overview. That's the only I can read now.
Well, what this is showing is a hierarchy along the left from single term sentences, ball, candle, bread, to multiple term sentences. Can I have the one that's not cracked? To language comprehension, asking simple comprehension questions to the more complex social comprehension questions. But going back to the initiation of the language matrix, now you can perhaps zooming in and see some of the specific terms that we're working on. Across the top, you see different, what we call modes of programming. So we're teaching the children to match and imitate. And when we're talking about a two-term match, can the child match two-term objects? So he's required to match both the object itself and the color of it. So it's match a red ball to a red ball instead of to a red cup, and match a blue ball to a blue cup. But also imitate with those things with actions. So if I spin the ball or I kick the can, will the child imitate that two-term model that I provide to him? And then requesting or manding is also, can the child request what he really wants? I want the broken plate. I want the one that's not broken. I want the one that's not broken and full, getting into a 3-term request. But when we think about the more traditional receptive and expressive programs that you're more normally going to associate, I think, with the Logos curriculum in print, is we're teaching the children to make receptive and expressive responses in the 2-dimensional setting. So thinking about that traditional flashcard setting, can the child identify expressively a subject and in a certain preposition format? Can they identify receptively the subject preposition? Can they do it 2 terms, maybe with flashcards or with books or on the screen of an iPad? And then can they also do it 3-dimensionally? So if I got actual toys, can they make a receptive response, a subject, action, object response? So if I tell him, put Big Bird, or make Big Bird dance on the object on the table, then he can make Big Bird dance on the table, which would be perhaps a 4-term trial once I've added that preposition in. And also expressively, if I make Big Bird dance on the table, he can tell me what Big Bird's doing. And then first person, if I tell him to do it, so this is more like a traditional receptive compliance task, or I ask him, what are you doing? And he tells me what he's doing. So he's dancing on the table. He could help describe what he's doing with his body. And then moving on down the columns, we're moving into 4-term, 5-term, 6-term statements, and all the way down then to the comprehension questions, which I'll cover in a second. So we're looking at whether the child can match, imitate, and request at higher and higher levels of complexity, and also across the different modes of expressive and receptive labeling. And also making sure that we're stressing then the free operant spontaneous language. So if he's just gesturing for something he wants, that's both under the requesting, but I'm also going to make sure that he's using his words to tact what he sees rather than just gesturing or maybe using too simple a number of terms. So instead of just using a single term, balloon, 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 he's all excited about the balloons. I want him to describe what we're doing. We're catching the balloons. So that stresses not only is he describing what he can do, but he's also describing what somebody else does with their body expressively, or perhaps as a yes, no. Is Mary behind the table or is Mary under the table? And then reading and writing, someone asked earlier about PECS or ACC approaches to language. We've also done quite a bit of work with reading and writing, teaching kids to read stimuli and type or write stimuli in order to communicate. And there's a certain small minority of children who actually learn to read and write faster than they learn to vocalize. And they take very readily to reading and writing. They're fascinated with looking at, they'd rather look at a word card than a picture card. And they learn quickly to type and read full sentences even though they can't speak them. But we'll use reading and writing then as a cue to teach them to speak. And then we get into the cognitive basis of language skills, which really not just is matching, but then categorizing and sequencing. And can they understand what are the characteristics of a category? What are the members of a category? What category might this member be? And it's all based on matching and sorting as a foundation for learning really almost all the academic knowledge that you learn all the way through college. you're fundamentally sorting and matching and identifying characteristics of a category. So that just zooms in there. And then also the comprehension and language production, it's sort of like a matrix, goes both directions. We're moving from multiple terms into higher and higher numbers of terms into the comprehension tasks that require multiple terms to master. But we're also making sure that as the children are using receptive and expressive language, that they're able to generalize the receptives and the expressives to comprehension and language production tasks at the same level of complexity. So I think this zooms in here. So I may simply be asking the child under comprehension, excuse me, on the left, I may simply be asking the child which one is big, and all he has to do is say the ball. And so he's giving me a one-term answer to a one-term question, which is, as you look above in the traditional comprehension task, that's both a visual and an auditory component. He's looking at what I've got on the table, and he's hearing the question I asked him, and then he has to give me the one-term answer at the one-term level. But he could be giving it at a two-term level. So where is Mickey? And Mickey is behind the table. And then other comprehension is purely auditory. So what did you do yesterday? And productive language is the extension of our expressives into storytelling, sequencing and storytelling, as I was alluding to later. And both sequencing and storytelling can be visual, or it can be auditory, or it can be a combination. So for storytelling, the child might be telling the story using puppets. So there's a visual component as well as what he's saying auditorially. And we're measuring the integration of the two. So how much complexity is there in the visual field added to how much complexity are we expecting in his sentences that he's using. So he may only be using two-term sentences, but he can tell me a three-step story using his puppets and two-term sentences. And then making sure we're also generalizing those language at whatever level of complexity he's got mastered into natural social activities. And the observational learning that I mentioned, and conversations. So now this table focuses in language and natural social activities. So is he using receptive and expressive language at this correct level of terms at play, in the home, in general home life, in the community, in general community life? Is he able to learn through observational learning when he sees a model of children playing with a new toy, let's say the new Disney Moana toy? Is he able to learn and then produce receptives and expressives based on simply observing children play with that new toy? And similarly, conversations. Is he able to reciprocate 1, 2, 3-term sentences to me, and also answer comprehension questions about the conversations we're having? So what we're doing is we're essentially making sure that anything that seems highly discrete is also highly natural and done in the natural environment. And we're coordinating the level of complexity of the child's language across all the natural opportunities for using language throughout the child's 24-hour, 7-day week. And now I'm going to get into, when I talk about these multiple term tasks, I'm going to get into the conditional discrimination procedure, but I'll stop here and let Victor review the language matrix briefly.
One question.
Yes.
how do you go through the metrics when during the intervention?
I'm not sure I follow your question.
How do you go through the metrics? Do you start sequentially, working on one column and all the going through the complexity? Or,
That's a good question.
and then going that way? How do you do that?
Yeah, wondering how the progress is through this curriculum. I'll have some other slides where I illustrate some of this point in a little bit, but I'll answer your question. It's individualized. So one child, their strength may be two-dimensional expressives, and they're extremely weak on labeling what their own body is doing. So that two-dimensional expressive column may be much further down mastered than any of the other columns. So we forge ahead with their strength, and then we start using that strength as a prompt to teach the more difficult. So a child that can't describe what he's doing, but if I show him a picture of a boy jumping, then I may tell him to jump. So he can't receptively jump, but he can expressively label a picture of jumping. And when I'm now giving him the receptive command jump, I may show him the picture as I'm saying it, and then I fade out that picture as a prompt to teach him to receptively jump. So what I'll want to do generally is teach to fluency and elaborate competence in the column that's strong, and then start teaching at an easier level the areas that are weak. And same thing with natural programming. I may be just developing very basic compliance alone at home with the therapist and the mother, but the child's extremely hyperactive in the community and at risk for bolting and danger. So I'm mastering receptive compliance in the home before I take them to the park and risk the danger in the park. So you're not going to necessarily see everything move as a flat line. You're going to more see a pattern. And I think we actually have I won't try to jump ahead for the sake of our patient Spanish PowerPoint manipulator. But I'll show an example where it actually looks very jagged. So that's a very good question.
Bueno, es un poco lo que he hecho desde que hemos empezado hasta este momento, es un poco explicar todo lo que tiene que ver con la matriz de lenguajes. Vuelvo al inicio de todo. Digamos como, ese es el cuadro general sobre la matriz del lenguaje, donde, como comentaba el doctor Larsson, vamos a ir incrementando la jerarquía en la complejidad del lenguaje. Es decir, tanto lo que el niño va a tener que reconocer como lo que va a tener que designar, que hacer expresivamente. Vamos a irlo programando de forma muy cuidadosa desde situaciones como relativamente sencillas, donde solo estamos enseñando un término, una respuesta, y progresivamente vamos a ir generando combinaciones de estos términos que ha ido aprendiendo. Y uno de los aspectos bueno, desde 2 términos, 3 términos, y como decía, incrementando la jerarquía es como introduciendo más términos y discriminación en el desarrollo de las habilidades. Introduciendo, asegurando que la complejidad se incrementa a través de mayor número de discriminaciones en un mismo estímulo, tanto sea verbal como de objetos o de situaciones en una foto o en un campo de trabajo. Uno de los aspectos importantes, si aquí estamos incrementando la jerarquía, por esta línea como más horizontal, estamos buscando como los diferentes modos de respuesta. Nos tenemos que asegurar, como por ejemplo, antes de introducir aspectos verbales, el niño tiene buena resolución, buena ejecución en tareas de imitación, en tareas de emparejamiento, como por ejemplo, un ejemplo de los que el doctor Larsson es Bien, si el niño es capaz de hacer un emparejamiento en 2 términos, es decir, si yo le pongo, es capaz de emparejar una pelota roja con una pelota roja en presencia de una pelota azul, de un coche azul y un coche rojo, es decir, va a ser capaz de hacer la discriminación entre pelota y coche y rojo y azul. Es decir, tenemos que asegurarnos que estas previas, desde un punto de vista de emparejamiento en este caso, o de imitación, en términos de que pues el niño chuta una pelota o le da una patada al coche, o chuta al coche, digamos, como es capaz de hacer esta discriminación en la que es la acción de chutar y el objeto sobre el que chuta. Eso es uno de los aspectos importantes que añado desde el punto de vista, que añado algo que comenta el doctor Larsson, para conceptos como grande, pequeño, tareas previas de adverbios espaciales, tareas de emparejamiento, tareas de imitación, donde el niño tiene que tener una discriminación visual, por ejemplo, con respecto a la posición de un objeto antes de introducir lenguaje. ¿Por qué? Porque esa previa del emparejamiento, de la imitación, nos va a ayudar a que realmente cuando introducimos el reconocimiento verbal, sea receptivo o expresivo, nos estemos asegurando que si hay problemas en la adquisición no es porque no hay una discriminación visual apropiada, o no es porque hay una capacidad de imitación suficientemente grande. Entonces, como decía, aquí trabajamos con los diferentes modos de respuesta, donde lo que vamos a ver es como, la pregunta que hacía Rodrigo es como, bueno, tenemos que seguir una forma concreta, es decir, tenemos que cubrir para, digamos, como cualquier cosa que estamos enseñando por este lado, o tenemos que ir incrementando la dificultad, a pesar de que el niño pueda tener dificultades afectivas o expresivas. Lo que dice el doctor Larsson en ese sentido es como, bueno, en realidad es todo aquí muy individualizado. Lo que sí es importante es estar construyendo sobre las fortalezas que tiene el niño. Es decir, si queremos acelerar la adquisición, necesitamos trabajar sobre las habilidades que más fácilmente el niño es capaz de poder aprender. ¿Por qué? Porque eso nos va a llevar a que el niño pueda estar haciendo más discriminaciones y potencialmente poder abordar habilidades que son más complejas para el niño o formatos de respuesta que son más complejos, pero que realmente si tiene mucha más discriminación la probabilidad de que lo pueda aprender es más alta. Uno de los aspectos importantes con respecto a los modos de respuesta tiene que ver con el lenguaje espontáneo, con operantes libres, en términos de que es importante asegurar que si el niño puede estar haciendo discriminaciones de 2 términos o de ¿seguís lo de los 2 términos o 3 términos? ¿Esto se entiende? ¿Sí? Si el niño puede estar haciendo discriminaciones expresivas de 2 términos o 3 términos, es importante que nos aseguremos que el niño en su lenguaje espontáneo no siga pidiendo una pelota diciendo pelota, cuando él puede tener un repertorio verbal de 2 o 3 palabras. Cuando él puede estar respondiendo a pelota azul, vaso lleno o plato sucio, es importante que en el lenguaje espontáneo nos estemos asegurando que realmente el niño está utilizando esa complejidad de lenguaje que le estamos enseñando, porque si no, hay muchas veces en las que, volviendo al tema y ya acabo, volviendo al tema de la intensidad, si un niño está respondiendo, entre comillas, 40 horas, un número de ensayos en 2 términos, pero hay 128 horas a la semana que él está respondiendo, está siendo reforzado por el uso de un solo término, consiguiendo instrucciones mucho más sencillas de las que él puede responder, es muy difícil llevar a su vida natural, o sea, a las situaciones naturales, las habilidades que el niño está aprendiendo. Es una interpretación muy libre de lo que ha dicho el doctor Larsson. Vale. No. Con respecto a la lectura y escritura, hacía referencia a tu pregunta, ¿no? En cuanto a que, bueno, va a depender de cada niño. Es verdad que hay niños que la habilidad con la cual van a estar aprendiendo desde un punto de vista de lectura, de escritura, desde un punto de vista de typing, pues es más rápida que quizás desde un punto de vista verbal. Por ejemplo, aquí unas especies... Okay. El aprendizaje observacional, de nuevo, creo que es uno de los aspectos como más básicos de cara a la comprensión social. Hay muchas veces que estamos intentando enseñar habilidades sociales que queremos que el niño actúe de una forma concreta y utilizamos una explicación, intentamos poner una cantidad de lenguaje cuando a lo mejor el niño no es capaz de poder imitar simplemente esa situación que está pasando. more or less. Como, insisto, perdonad la interpretación, la traducción tan libre que hago. I don't know when did you finish? Entonces, eso es uno de los aspectos. Necesitamos por eso es tan importante la evaluación constante y semanal, porque realmente necesitamos ir diseñando como semana a semana en base a lo que el niño es capaz, en base a lo que nosotros somos capaces que el niño esté aprendiendo de forma más acelerada o de forma más lenta. Porque al final vamos a estar entendiendo que lo que está aprendiendo es producto de lo que estamos siendo capaces de enseñar. Con lo cual, ahí es donde necesitamos, es como diseñar específicamente para el niño en cada semana. O sea, en un 20% es lo que ha dicho él.
I have a motor task I haven't mastered.
Don't worry, I can do it for you. That's a very romantic situation.
I can't. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So when we talk about these matrix tasks, there's quite a literature on matrix programming in applied behavior analysis. And what I've taken that to is understanding a sentence as a matrix task as a conditional discrimination. So here's an example of an expressive matrix task. I want the child to look at this picture and tell me that's Big Buzz. And I think as I show you this picture, you're thinking, why would he call it Big Buzz? It could be Little Buzz, or it could be Happy Buzz, or Buzz with the hook, or he may not even know who Buzz is. So obviously, when we're talking about a conditional discrimination, he needs to have conditional stimuli in order to indicate whether this is a big buzz or a little buzz. And now at this point, we have a distractor for the adjective big. And now we have a distractor for the object label buzz. So we have Woody, we've got a big and a little Woody, and we've got a big and a little buzz. And now with this field, there's sufficient distractors to make this a conditional discrimination task, requiring the child to make 2 responses in order to correctly identify each one of these stimuli. And this could also be a receptive task. I could be the one saying Big Buzz, and he's pointing to the Big Buzz. And this could be 2D, as it literally is on this screen, or this could be 3D. We could be on the floor playing with Toy Story characters, or it could be his body. He and I could be dressed up in costumes, and we're labeling who we are. I'm Big Buzz, and the child's Little Buzz. So we've collected data on the children's progress through the language matrix curriculum. And this data, oh, by the way, I think you still have that language matrix manuscript posted on the Foundation website?
I think so.
Yeah, I haven't looked in a long time, but
yeah,
it is.
If it was there, it's still there.
You want to announce your website?
You can do it. It's more natural.
How would it be spelled, or what would the terms be? PlanetImaginario.com or
.org.
.org? So we have a manuscript that discusses all the steps in the curriculum. On Victor's website, as well as on our website in the United States. But looking at the data here, this is an individual child and their rate of mastery of matrix programs, starting at the left with one-term tasks. So adjectives, objects, actions, mastered receptively, how many days before they mastered each one of these different tasks, either at the 3D, 2D, first person or second person level. And then the expressive, how many days it mastered. And then the two-term, going into the true conditional discriminations, mastering them much quicker, but still requiring perhaps 3 weeks on average to master a two-term task. And each one of these columns requires generative mastery. So I'm showing the child a novel SD, and the child is correct on the first trial, unprompted, and receptive and expressive. And then moving to three-term, and you can see there's a little bit of a shaking out of the expressive as certain tasks that are a little more difficult than the receptive, even out to the 5-term. And even though the child is showing further generative responding in that he's learning the more complex conditional discriminations faster and faster, it's actually easier for him to master the receptives than the expressives in general.
Is that data from one child?
This is one child, and this is the same child, kind of going back to your other question.
Yeah.
So here, this is graphed out by the date each program was introduced. So now all of this breakdown, this is organizing by the different modes of the language matrix, whereas this is the data simply in sequence in the child's program from April of 1997 out to February of 1998. And so all those specific modes are mixed together. And so you're seeing the child in general is mastering faster.
Excuse me, Dr. Larsson. How do you collect or record the database?
How do we record the data? Our primary, and we're going to also cover that later, but our primary measure is mastery on a new day with a new generalized exemplar. And so when you're looking at this data, this is number of days to mastery. So if we're counting colors, expressive one-term colors mastered, then I would be showing that child a brand new set of stimuli. Like say I was using balls and cars and clothing to teach. And then on a new day, I'm showing him something else like trucks. And when I hold up a red truck, he says red. And that's unprompted, no history of prompting. On a new day, novel response, same response to novel stimulus.
So what about the baseline? Do you collect the baseline for every program?
Yeah, and actually, because of this generative process, we don't assume that the child still needs to be taught these more complex skills. We're actually probing every curriculum item that we introduce. We're wondering, do I even have to teach this? So I had to teach him at 3-term expressively. Do I have to teach him at 4-term receptively? I want to just probe without prompting and see if he automatically generalizes to that higher level of terms. And so some of these probes are in just mastered at baseline, and others required a day of teaching, and others required 3 weeks of teaching. And then this is averaging it all together. So, and this isn't days to mastery. This is the percentage of probes mastered. So actually it's answering your question still. So at the 1-term level, only 15% of those probes at baseline were mastered. At the 2-term level, more than 20%, 3-term, more than 40%, 0 at 4-term, but at 5-term, over 70% were mastered at baseline. So here's a second child. So this goes back to comparing to the first graph I showed for the first child. So it's different pattern of receptives and expressives as they go forward. And here also this child, in some cases, the receptive was easier than the expressive at 3-term. Not necessarily looking obvious. I guess it actually does look a little longer to teach expressives at 2-term as well. And here's child 3, playing around with different ways to illustrate the data. So again, 3D, 2D, child and staff as the SD, and the expressive and the receptive. So in general, again, moving faster as the program gets more complex, because we're building on this generative foundation, it's actually faster at the more complex stimuli than slower. So in general, if you were to look at a short-term objective sheet, the program would follow this sequence in the task analysis, that whatever level of terms the short-term objective is at, we're teaching the term until generative. We're often making sure that matching or imitation as a foundational skill is mastered prior to an expressive or a receptive. And I can't stress that enough. So for example, some programs, say like prepositions, that may seem constantly challenging with a certain child, often our troubleshooting of that problem is we're not teaching the child to visual competence with the prepositions. So instead of teaching him to receptively or expressively label the preposition, can he simply imitate it? So if I've got a series of subjects, say all the characters from Toy Story, and I've got some objects from Toy Story, and can he imitate? When I take Woody and put him on top of Slinky Toy, can he find another Woody and put him on top of Slinky Toy? And if he can, and then I put Buzz behind Slinky Toy, and then I put Barbie next to Mrs. Potato Head. And if he can't imitate those prepositional arrangements at the 3-term level, why would I try to get him to expressively label what I'm doing? And if he's having trouble with the expressives or the receptives with those prepositions, well, let's teach him to imitate the arrangement. I'm not using words. I'm here, do this, do this, do this, and you can make the arrangements that now I'm going to start to teach him to expressively label. And then making sure there's full distractors, so it's not, the child can't guess what it is I'm going to have him do. He's got to pay attention to the choices that are presented. We'll often, again, dispelling notions about Logos, it's not all on the table with this perfectly laid out array, but we want to be able to just have a jumble of toys on the floor. So we're playing Tarzan, we've got some trees and some jungle animals and some of the Tarzan figures, and we're doing it within a natural play context of playing with the Tarzan toys, but we're purposefully targeting, say, 2-term preposition, adjective preposition combinations within that natural play context. Both can he imitate, can he match, and can he receptively and expressively label? And And then always making sure we're programming generalization and novel exemplars, making sure we're fully randomizing again so we can't guess what the target is, making sure that we're throwing in irrelevant continuums. So it's not going to be preposition, 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 but it may be throwing in addressing SD that has nothing to do with the task that we're working on, to make sure that he easily switches and isn't inferring the correct response because of our inadvertent sequencing in the program. Expanding to spontaneous maintenance, we're probing, going back to that operant vocal language. We want him to automatically be using prepositions now in his daily life, and we're targeting that for operant reinforcement. So, okay, we've been teaching him prepositions, so it's going on his operant reinforcement program. Let's make sure we notice when he uses a preposition correctly in real life, boom, we need to be reinforcing that. And backing up a step, too many times I'm observing a child and they're not very spontaneous with their language. They're very quiet. They do use some words, but they don't vocalize a lot throughout the day. But you look at a normal little 3-year-old girl walking around Cadiz, and she doesn't shut up. She's constantly tapping everything and throwing in some ands and some interverbals. What's this? Why are we doing it? And I don't even understand what she's talking about because she's speaking Spanish. But what we want to do is make sure we're reinforcing that spontaneous language at a basic level, and then as this receptives and expressives are mastered, start to raise the criterion for reinforcement to require that these are accurate expressives that she's using. And then often with our expressive program, we're calling it play narration. So it may have seemed like repetitive, more structured and repetitive discrete trials at the 1 and 2 term level, but we're at the 3 and 4 term level. And like I was just saying with Tarzan, we're just sitting here playing with the Tarzan toys, and we just want the child constantly describing what he's doing with the Tarzan toys, and the number of expressives in a row becomes the target in the objective. And then combine multimodal trials, it's not all going to be 3D expressive. We're going to mix receptives with expressives. We're going to mix prepositions with actions. Again, making sure the child isn't falling into sort of a rote momentum, but using generalized momentum to encourage continued responding. Make sure that we're programming naturalized responding to all natural environments, and then using the easier, the stronger modes to program for the more difficult. So all of these would be aspects of the short-term objective depending upon the actual focus of need for the child. And here's where, again, saying the same thing, strategically using the modes. So this slide's just repeating what I've said a couple of times now, is picking what's a strong mode and using that as prompt or behavioral momentum for a weak mode. And here again, answering your question from here, here's a layout of a child's program. So taking each one of the cells and coloring in what's mastered, you can see this child has strengths, and this is the 3-dimensional columns here, and he's a little further out on the receptive than on the expressive. And there's other columns that are completely absent. So this is the labeling second person receptively. So that would be asking yes, no questions about what the second person is doing. There's nothing there. That's waiting for later in the program. And so again, this is illustrating where the child's strengths are, building there, and then using those strengths to teach other columns that are lagging behind.
So in more or less, you keep on a certain, if the child reaches a certain level in complexity, so you try to go on through the right of the matrix.
Right.
In that level.
Yes.
Like you can sense like breadth and depth of your curriculum kind of, and you want to expand in breadth before depth? Or
Yes.
does that make sense?
And for the sake of those online, I've been asked to repeat your comments. So the, again, the audience is repeating this concept of moving through the breadth and the depth of the curriculum by using in a logical manner, moving to slightly more complex tasks within each column. But again, not ignoring all the natural uses of language, making sure that we're generalizing to true natural opportunities. So again, these slides are just repeating that same concept. Are there stronger modes that we can use as prompts or behavioral momentum to teach weaker modes? And so often at the beginning of treatment, we're looking at, is this child more readily learning motor tasks or picture tasks or object tasks? Is he more readily learning fine or gross motor tasks? Is he more readily responding to instructions or imitation? Is he more readily learning on a tabletop or face-to-face or on the floor or standing rather than sitting? So this is all like a functional analysis of what his strengths are at the beginning of treatment, and then focusing in on the strongest mode for teaching, master skills to the generative level, and then start generalizing to the more challenging modes. In the interest of time, I'll jump through some of these slides. And so here's an example of a child that we worked with who was not mastering motor imitation. So clapping hands, knock table, point, wave, touch head. These were skills that he was highly challenged to master as motor skills. But he was mastering object imitation more quickly. And in general, we often assume object imitation will be mastered more quickly because it's more visual and more salient to the child what they're doing. So we identified, in this child's case, a very specific task analysis to take object imitation task that was related to the motor imitation and teach the object imitation first, and then use the object imitation as a prompt for the motor imitation, both as momentum and as a prompt. So I'm teaching him, he's not putting his two fists together in imitation, but he will crash two cars together. So let's crash cars together. Now let's just put our fists together. Same thing, cymbals, clang two cymbals before clap hands. So here's a graph of using this topographical fading from object imitation. His motor imitation was not mastered at baseline. His object imitation was needed to be strengthened. And once we got object imitation strong, then we started this phase of related object imitation. So we were using it both as these related object imitation tests, as behavioral momentum, and as prompts for the child to do the motor imitation. And then, so that's the blue squares. Then the blue circles are when we're fading out the object imitation, and then you get to the true motor imitation measures at the end. Is this a good point for you to jump in, or shall I go longer?
To you. Well, yeah.
I think I've got a few more slides that probably are still all related. We also stress, when you think about behavioral momentum as a fundamental principle of behavior, we're also stressing expansion. So one of the strengths of the discrete trial approach is boom, 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 trial, 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 trial. It's once the child gets into the swing of that momentum, it's easier for him to make correct responses on the subsequent trials. But then he doesn't necessarily generalize to a spontaneous performance 3 hours later or on the weekend. So what we're purposely doing is expanding the amount of time between trials in order to program generalization to spontaneous trials. So again, using a preposition example, in discrete trials, it's rapid succession of trials, boom, 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 boom. And now I'm going to wait 3 trials before I give them another preposition trial. And then I'm going to wait 10 trials before another preposition trial. And then it's no longer within the discrete trial context, but it's only a few minutes after we move to another room and I'm doing another preposition trial. And then the mother brings him to the kitchen for a snack, and the mother purposely does a preposition trial. So the amount of time between preposition trials is being expanded in order to create spontaneity and maintenance. And I'll come back to this later. We can increase the time systematically and gradually increase the complexity using the expansion of time in a systematic way between trials. And we can also, opposite to the expansion is collapse to create a discrimination. So when it's very hard for the child to switch between on and in, I can make sure I don't alternate on and in immediately, but I'm doing them separately as, say, 15 minutes separating on from in and on from in randomized sequence. And then I start collapsing the time closer and closer together. So we very much pay attention to the amount of time in between different targets when it's a challenge. And really it all goes back to Nevin's principles of behavioral momentum is why that's working for us. Now's a good time before I get to the comprehension for us to switch over.
Vale. Siguiendo con mi intervención libre de lo que Eric está diciendo, aquí cuando estamos programando para generar discriminaciones condicionales, es importante el hecho de asegurar que vamos a tener suficientes distractores, es decir, que la complejidad de la respuesta no solo va a ir por la respuesta que tiene cada niño, sino también por las discriminaciones que están presentes en el campo. Por ejemplo, cuando nosotros queremos que el niño esté reconociendo este discriminativo como más grande, es importante que si no tenemos otras discriminaciones, aquí podríamos estar hablando sobre la emoción, sobre lo que está haciendo, con lo cual es importante el hecho de asegurar que vamos a tener que para 2 términos con respecto a big bus, es importante que haya un bus grande-pequeño y un grande-pequeño, para que realmente tenga que hacer la doble discriminación. Es tan importante el que el niño haga esta respuesta como que realmente esté discriminando sobre las otras posibles opciones. Eso es algo importante desde el punto de vista de la matriz del lenguaje y de poder llegar a generar, obtener respuestas generativas. Eso es uno de los ejemplos, lo presenta en 3 niños diferentes, donde el entrenamiento desde un término en receptivo y expresivo, a 2 términos, a 3 términos, 4 o 5 términos, y cada una de las columnas corresponde a los diferentes formatos de respuesta. Lo que aquí vemos es que, a pesar de que incrementamos la jerarquía, a pesar de que incrementamos la complejidad de la tarea, el número de ensayos a través de el número de días que el niño necesita para poder completar la tarea, digamos como cuando la columna acaba es cuando el niño ha logrado la respuesta generativa en segunda persona, en 2D para un término expresivo. Entonces, lo que vemos es que, a pesar de que vamos incrementando la jerarquía, la complejidad, a pesar de que el ejercicio es más complejo, no solo por la respuesta que tiene que dar el niño, sino porque la discriminación es mucho más compleja, la capacidad, o sea, el tiempo que el niño tarda en aprender es mucho menos. Aquí podemos ver la diferencia entre el receptivo y el expresivo, y como, por ejemplo, en 5 términos el niño, a pesar de que el receptivo, la respuesta generativa llega muy rápido, en expresivo sigue necesitando algunos entrenamientos. Esta información nos va a ayudar a priorizar en base a la fortaleza o la debilidad del niño. Es decir, si el niño está llegando antes a respuestas generativas en 3D o en 2D, o con primera persona o en segunda persona. Pero esto es, creo que uno de los aspectos claves con respecto a la matriz del lenguaje y buscar la respuesta generativa es que debemos poder encontrar estos efectos, como lo podemos ver como como en diferentes niños, digamos, el efecto que observamos es siempre el mismo, o debería ser donde el niño tarda menos en aprender tareas más complejas. Y tarda menos en aprender tareas más complejas porque es generativo en niveles más sencillos de respuesta. Por eso es tan importante no solo llegar a la respuesta generativa en un formato, sino poder completar todos los formatos. Luego, con respecto a la pregunta de Cristian de Rodrigo, veremos en el Language Matrix cómo se puede ir individualizando a cada niño y a cada momento del aprendizaje del niño. Entonces, con respecto a tus preguntas, era sobre la recogida de datos, pero todos estos, toda la evaluación de cómo en qué nivel tenemos que trabajar, estamos haciendo pruebas semanales, es decir, cada semana estamos evaluando si el niño necesita entrenamiento para el siguiente paso o los siguientes pasos, y asegurar que no estamos ni sobreentrenando ni entrenando cosas que el niño ya necesariamente tiene, a pesar de que vamos a programar para el éxito. Vamos a estar intentando no sobreentrenar habilidades. Bueno, creo que aquí ha estado explicando con respecto a asegurar que las combinaciones de términos pueden ser emparejado y imitada. Y era el ejemplo que él ponía con respecto a las preposiciones y la imitación de las posiciones con diferentes sujetos, con diferentes muñecos. El hecho de asegurar que esas habilidades nos pueden dar paso a posteriores entrenamientos receptivos o expresivos. Es importante aquí, creo que esta tarde en la sesión más práctica trabajaremos sobre esto, el aspecto de una discriminación completa, de que realmente cuando yo estoy buscando una respuesta de 3 términos en un niño, realmente está haciendo discriminaciones de cada uno de los términos, porque si no podemos estar generando patrones en los que el niño no necesita estar escuchando todo para poder reconocerlo, con lo cual le voy a estar enseñando a omitir cosas sin yo quererlo. Es importante también en el uso de distractores el programar de forma estructurada en el que vamos desde discriminaciones por niveles de discriminabilidad, desde discriminaciones más sencillas a discriminaciones más complejas. Y asegurar que expansionamos el entrenamiento y que hasta un punto en el que esa habilidad se mantiene a pesar de que no la seguimos entrenando, no la sigue practicando. Uno de los aspectos que también comentaba aquí el doctor Larsson es sobre el hecho de la capacidad de que el niño pueda tener como una respuesta fluida, en términos de que si yo en un momento de trabajo solo estoy trabajando sobre preposición, en realidad estoy poniendo al niño en un momento de conducta en el que necesito asegurar que el apoyo, o sea, la respuesta anterior no sea un apoyo para la siguiente. Entonces, esa capacidad para poder responder de forma fluida, aquí programar de forma multimodal en una misma sesión, en una misma situación, en la que estamos entrando en una habilidad de formas diferentes en el mismo momento. Siempre teniendo en cuenta, bueno, la introducción, estar programando para la generalización hacia situaciones nuevas con personas y modos de respuesta o lugares. Y asegurar que pasamos que hacemos pruebas sobre formatos de respuesta más sencillos sin necesidad de que el niño sea ayudado o sea puesto en un momento de conducta para poder responder. De nuevo, el centrarnos sobre aquellos formatos de los que el niño es más fuerte como para usarlos como apoyo, como momento de conducta o como paso para la retirada para la retirada hacia la respuesta meta. Aquí, este es el ejemplo en la slide que comentaba el doctor Larsson con respecto a que no necesariamente vamos a estar siguiendo de forma rígida, por poner todas las secuencias, sino que es verdad que vamos a estar buscando máxima generalización antes que complejidad, pero vamos a ir adaptando a cada uno de los niños. Es importante que nos aseguremos la respuesta generativa a través de formatos o modalidades de respuesta, a pesar de que podamos seguir adelante, como por ejemplo, pues aquí comentando el doctor Larsson en términos de, bueno, por ejemplo, aquí en segunda persona, pues realmente él tiene dificultades, nos va a parar para poder seguir sobre otros formatos. Pero el objetivo, o sea, el concepto de la necesidad de individualizar, pero sabiendo para qué es lo que queremos conseguir. Como antes hablaba con respecto a la comprensión social, sabiendo a dónde quiero llegar. Y necesariamente no tiene que ser por una complejidad altísima, sino realmente una respuesta generalizada, lo más generalizada posible, lo más generativa posible. Entonces, aquí de nuevo vamos a estar asegurando que vamos a estar entrenando múltiples respuestas y vamos a estar buscando la forma en la que realmente pues, el niño le puede servir, lo puede utilizar de forma mucho más sencilla y asegurando pues, que vamos a estar entrenando aquellos formatos en los que realmente vamos a ser más capaces de generar velocidad, de generar aceleración. De nuevo, interpretación librería. Entonces, aquí, por ejemplo, lo que él explica es como, bueno, a lo mejor me puedo encontrar un niño en el que realmente hacer imitaciones más finas, como por ejemplo, hacer esa imitación, a lo mejor él tiene dificultades para hacerla, pero realmente en una imitación con objetos, en dos coches que chocan, pues realmente lo puede hacer, pues seguramente eso es un modo de respuesta más fuerte para él, es más fácil para el niño, con lo cual lo podemos utilizar como un apoyo para pasos posteriores con respecto a una imitación sin objeto, por ejemplo. Entonces, aquí pone entonces, aquí pone ejemplos donde, por ejemplo, aquí en la imitación motora el niño tiene un bajo rendimiento, pero con objeto la capacidad que él tiene para poder responder es mucho más alta. Entonces, aquí es cuando el ejemplo del coche, ¿no? Cuando a partir de una imitación con objeto, cuando nos vamos a respuestas parecidas sin objeto, donde ahí la adquisición es más rápida. ¿Qué estrés? Pero sirve para algo, ¿no? Sí, ¿no? Vale. Gracias.
Javier, do we want a second break before lunch or just go to lunch?
It's really up to you, but you think we need a break?
Yeah, I don't need breaks, but maybe everybody else does.
Do you need a break?
We'll just keep going.
5 minutes break? 5 minutes break?
No.
No? No.
Do you want one?
No.
I didn't see anyone say yes.
Sorry?
I didn't see anyone say yes.
Okay.
Victor needs a break.
Yeah, I mean, to a point.
Yeah, I say yes, I don't know if people follow me.
Raise your hand.
Okay,
5 minutes break.
short break, only 5 minutes, and then I start talking. 5-minute break.
Okay.
programs show up again, envisioning that yellow table again right now, show up again on the right as comprehension programs. These are more complex tasks for the child, and they tend to be often in other curriculums. They show up, say, in the verbal behavior approach under the category of intraverbals, but it's this huge complex category of potential programs, and our attempt here is to systematize them so that we can actually make progress with kids that are showing different strengths and weaknesses. And the first thing we know when we start programming for comprehension is that there's really two components to the stimulus that's presented to the child. There's a presentation or a model, if you will, and there's an instruction or a question. So if I'm saying to the child, who chased you, then they're able to see that situation they were just in. Somebody was chasing me, and they're able to understand or answer, hear my auditory question. And both aspects of the SD are important. There has to be this situation. They were being chased, and there's my question that result then in a potential comprehension response. And what we often see is that when the interverbals are mixed too dramatically, is that the child's not able to make progress because some of the tasks are highly visual and some of the tasks are highly auditory, and they're all mixed kind of in a random fashion. And when we're counting terms, we're counting how many terms do they have to attend to visually, and how many terms do they have to attend to auditorially, and how many terms do they have to use to answer the question correctly. But you see, I also have it laid out as the presentation could be visual or it could be auditory. So I could be telling the child a story. So he's not looking at pictures. I'm just telling him a story, and then I'm asking him a question. Why did the bunny hide in the tree? And he hasn't seen anything, but he's able to listen, or he may be expected to listen to the story and then answer that question. The stimulus command that I give the child could also be visual. I could be writing out the questions for the child to read, or the questions could be auditory, or it could be a reciprocal conversation task where it's actually a visual comprehension task, and I'll get into that later when the time's right. And then there's all these potential modes of response, and the child may have certain modes that he's successful with, physical or written or vocal modes, or the combination of physical and vocal. And I can task analyze based on the child's difficulty. So let's jump ahead. What we also see, in addition to paying careful attention to, is this comprehension task visual? Is it a combination of visual and auditory stimuli, or is it purely auditory? Is it going to be just a concrete, detailed comprehension question? So who is jumping? What color is it? Where is the ball? These are all concrete because they're highly visual. Whether or not the task itself is created as a visual, it's something that could be visualized. And then there's more abstract comprehension where the task itself is not as visual. So why is the sky blue is highly non-visual. There's who knows why the sky is blue. There is a good answer for that, but obviously that's not something a child can easily visualize. But also these why and when and how questions require multiple steps to pay attention to, whereas the concrete, detailed comprehension is something that can be observed, fixed in time. Abstract comprehension, well, how did the plate get broken? Why is daddy chasing you? These are questions that require more more context in order to be answered. And then when we get to inferential comprehension, which is a hallmark of American kindergartens, there is no correct answer. So why do you think everyone wants to eat? And the child says, well, they're hungry, but how does he know whether they're hungry or not? What do you think will happen next? Who in this room has an idea for why the children want to celebrate the 4th of July? These are the kinds of inferential comprehension questions kids are faced with. There's no correct answer. It's not necessarily visual in that they may have never seen the answer to the question, but they're still expected to answer it. And then you get to the social comprehension, which again, social motivation is not necessarily visual. So why am I jealous of somebody else? Why do I want to be first? Well, you can't see why I want to be first. You can see that I want to be first. So that's more of a concrete detail. Who wants to be first? Well, it's Victor because he's standing first in line. He's the first one at the slide. But why does Victor want to be first? That's a social comprehension concept that's abstract and in one sense, and concrete in the sense of just recognizing Victor is getting in line first. So working out this task analysis for comprehension questions has solved many problems for us. Now I'll show you some examples as we work through the comprehension task analysis. One thing that I've ignored mentioning as we went through the language matrix is the WH term itself is a term in the question. So here I've got the same SD. So I've got Mickey playing the piano for Minnie, and Minnie sitting on the piano. But showing a child that little YouTube clip for 10 seconds of Mickey playing the piano for Minnie, I could ask, who's on? Or I could ask, where is Minnie? Or I could ask, what did Mickey do? And there's a different correct answer for each one of those questions. It's the same visual SD, but the child has to pay attention to this term, on, and the WH. This term, Minnie and the WH. This term, Mickey and doing. So this is a 3-term question. What did Mickey do, really? And there's a 1-term answer for this. So often, again, going back to this problem of complexly mixed interverbals in the curriculum, we're often introducing WH questions really early in a child's program by mistake, because we're using WH questions as part of the expressive SD. So what's this? What's this? What's this? What's this? What's this? Where's this? Where's this? Where's this? Who's this? Who's this? Who's this? And there's no discrimination for those WH terms, usually in our expressive programs. So we're trying to actually reserve the WH questions until we actually get to legitimate multiple term discriminations in the comprehension context. And especially for those children that have trouble with WH discrimination, it's often because they've had all this extinction training on the WH. And this is the first time it actually matters that they have to pay attention to the WH question. And again, this is concrete because it's purely visual. You just look at Mickey and Minnie and you can answer that. It could be a purely auditory and concrete in that I could show him this, I can hide the picture and then ask him questions. What did Mickey do for Minnie? But I can also tell him a story about Mickey. Minnie was unhappy and Mickey decided to play the piano for Minnie, and Minnie liked his music. And then I could ask, what did Mickey do? So the child could visualize this, whether he's ever seen it in his life. It still is a very visual basis for him to give me the answer. So it's a concrete discrimination test. And then we build into higher term auditory comprehension. We can start combining more and more terms in our SD. So here, very simple vignette off of YouTube of Bambi slipping on the ice, skating with Thumper. It could be a very simple, Bambi is slipping, I'm telling him or I'm showing him. Bambi is slipping and Thumper is laughing. Who's laughing? And you can answer Thumper. Who's slipping? Bambi is slipping. What did Bambi do? Bambi slipped. What did Thumper do? Thumper laughed. I've got a simple SD with only 4 terms plus my 2-term question. And then I'm increasing the number of terms that he's answering that are still all detail comprehension. And then I'm moving to even longer stories. So now I'm telling you this story, which has perhaps 20 terms in it, and then asking him a 3-term question. And again, it could be visual, that he can see the pictures, or he can see the video, or he can see us acting out with the toys. And then he's answering a comprehension question. I'm gradually increasing the number of terms he has to pay attention to before he gets an unpredictable question. And then I start moving into the abstract, and I start off with direct, concrete reasoning. The abstract questions are when questions, how, why, and if what. And so in this case, when did they carry the groceries in? Again, it's fairly visual, but you have to follow the sequence of the story to be able to answer a when question. Why did they bring groceries to Ms. McGriz? Who brought groceries goes back to just a simple concrete question. But there's a bit of reasoning involved, so it's a little more abstract. And then more abstract altogether, so there's no cues in the story. This is a solution for a problem in Super Mario 64. And the child is told this story about the solution. And this could be me telling him how I figured out how to do this. But then I'm going to ask him, how did Mario get inside the fence? So now this is a more abstract question. Because he's required to answer this how question, which is much less visual. And then we get to the inferential comprehension. Why do you think, how do you think Mario got in the fence? I don't show him, I don't tell him the answer, I'm just asking him to figure out, how do you think Mario got inside the fence? What do you think will happen next? If Chain Chomp gets inside the fence, what do you think will happen? So now I'm asking him the kinds of inferential comprehension questions that school children are given. And he has to listen to the story and then give me the inferential answer. And myself as a parent or a teacher or staff person, I have to now be a good judge about, is that a good inferential answer, or is that really detached in an autistic way from the information I gave the child? So that then becomes part of the task analysis, is training the staff and the parents to just give a judicial reinforcer based on the best possible answer that they think the child was capable of giving. And then taking that to productive language, simultaneously, as we're moving through the comprehension questions, we're also increasing the child's ability to tell a story, and we're verifying that the child's not engaging in verbal diarrhea and giving a self-stimulatory story without paying attention to his audience. We're probing for comprehension, so we stop him while he's telling us a story and ask him a question about what he told us. And a child who's engaging in kind of this verbal self-stimulatory behavior, he's not telling a story for a social reason, he's just talking to talk. He can't answer a comprehension question about the story he's telling us. But a child that's purposefully telling me a story can answer the comprehension question that's at his current level of discriminative ability in the language matrix. So here's another good spot for me to stop.
Ese es una tarea, Angie did the short.
Angie did the social comprehension study.
Angie Brown and Ika Rita estuvieron involucradas en una
Language matrix study.
Angie Brown en sobre un estudio en matriz del lenguaje, donde me parece especialmente importante este slide donde realmente, por ejemplo, estamos explicando cuando nos vamos hacia la comprensión la presencia de más de un estímulo para llegar a la respuesta. Entonces aquí lo que el doctor Larsson explica es cómo, bueno, tenemos que tener en cuenta que la respuesta va a estar basada en una combinación de diseminaciones en dos estímulos. Por un lado, si ese estímulo es visual, es escrito, es auditivo, el segundo estímulo va a ser una pregunta, va a ser una instrucción. Aquí ponía el ejemplo de un niño al que le preguntan ¿quién te estaba persiguiendo? Entonces, la situación es como hay un primer estímulo en el que es la situación en la que él es perseguido por un niño. Por otro lado está el segundo estímulo, donde realmente es un estímulo que le va a llevar a su respuesta. Y vamos a ver qué tipo de respuesta él requiere. Uno de los aspectos que aquí él comenta es que la naturaleza de los estímulos van a hacer que esa tarea sea mucho más fácil y sea mucho más difícil. Es lo que estaba explicando al final sobre las inferencias, sobre si los estímulos están presentes o no. Pero aquí, un poco el hecho de decir, bueno, si es un estímulo visual con una instrucción y que él debe hacer una respuesta motora, pues seguramente esta respuesta es como mucho más concreta, es mucho más fácil que un estímulo en el que alguien te explica algo, te hacen una pregunta sobre lo que te han explicado y tienes que dar una respuesta verbal. Lo que en ese sentido, lo que Larsson comenta es que ante la comprensión de estímulos, es decir, cuando tenemos un detalle concreto sobre de qué color es el objeto, ese objeto, ese estímulo es algo como mucho más concreto que, por ejemplo, que te pregunten de qué color es el cielo. Entonces, volviendo a las situaciones como si aquí estamos viendo como de cuántos términos se compone cada uno de los estímulos, ¿no? Porque luego cuando nos veamos a las preguntas y yo les estoy diciendo quién está encima, tenemos que ir sumando la cantidad de términos más la respuesta que el niño tiene que ir haciendo. ¿Me estoy explicando o...? Sí. Vale, menos mal porque... si me vais haciendo así o así, es genial, ¿eh? Como sentidos libres. Vale. Entonces, progresivamente nos vamos incrementando la complejidad, vamos disminuyendo el nivel de comprensión de los estímulos y se va incrementando también el nivel de complejidad con respecto a la respuesta. Lo que él ponía es como, por ejemplo, las respuestas concretas, la pregunta que yo decía sobre de qué color es, por ejemplo, en algo más abstracto, cuando ya aquí el niño tiene que explicar cómo se rompió esto, para llegar a temas más inferenciales donde realmente no hay necesariamente una respuesta correcta. Lo que quiere decir es que el color de un objeto es solo una respuesta. Cómo se rompió se puede explicar de muchas formas, pero se rompe de una forma. Pero ¿por qué a los niños, por ejemplo, les gusta celebrar el 4 de julio? Es una respuesta que puede ser muy variada y que realmente el nivel de concreción es mínima y que realmente ahí el niño tiene que estar empezando a dar respuestas en base a lo que puede estar suponiendo de por qué les gusta a los otros o por qué no, en este caso, ¿no? Entonces, uno de los aspectos que el doctor Larsson comenta con respecto, por ejemplo, a esta situación es que es importante el hecho de no introducir este tipo de discriminaciones muy pronto en el programa. Es decir, como esperar a que realmente, aquí era lo de los términos, aquí era cuando él estaba dando los términos, ¿no? Donde realmente aquí es como, además del estímulo, del estímulo en 2D que le está viendo, o vídeo creo que es, realmente hay como, bueno, es un término, dos términos, más la respuesta, más el vídeo que ha podido ver. Entonces, ¿qué pasa? Que para realmente generar o poder estar trabajando en aceleración, en una respuesta generativa, necesitamos introducir todas estas habilidades sin que necesariamente sean en ruta. Es decir, ¿quién es tu padre? ¿Quién es tu madre? ¿Quién es tu profesora? ¿Quién es el bombero? ¿Quién es el frutero? ¿Quién es el, dónde vive el oso? ¿Dónde vive el cerdo? Lo que vamos a buscar es poder trabajar esas habilidades cuando realmente haya una cantidad de discriminación, el número de términos muy significativa. Y el niño esté muy acostumbrado a generar respuestas, a llegar hasta la respuesta generativa para incrementar la complejidad en el entrenamiento. Porque es eso, es como uno de los aspectos es, no solo hay diferentes, el número de términos es muy grande, sino que a lo mejor incluso, que añado lo que decía el doctor Larsson, como a lo mejor un solo término puede cambiar toda la respuesta. Es decir, por ejemplo, ¿dónde está Mini? Encima, o ¿quién es Mini? Porque claro, supuestamente el niño sabe reconocer a Mini, pero simplemente un término cambia una respuesta de 4 o 5 términos. Es por lo que todo lo que le dan las WH questions, las preguntas interrogativas, muchas veces tienen esa dificultad a la hora de entrenar, de enseñar habilidades para diseños dentro del espectro, porque realmente la complejidad es muy grande, aunque aparentemente la respuesta para nosotros sea muy sencilla. Pero ¿por qué? ¿Por qué nos puede parecer sencillo? Porque no estamos contando la cantidad de términos que se pueden desarrollar. Entonces, aquí, bueno, en las siguientes slides, en las siguientes diapositivas, lo que hace el doctor Larsson es como ir incrementando el nivel de complejidad. Es decir, bueno, podemos ver un vídeo de Bambi con el Thumper, y hacer como diferentes preguntas, pero si, por ejemplo, hacemos esta tarea sin el vídeo, el nivel de complejidad es mucho mayor. Entonces, es importante el hecho de si nos entrenamos desde un punto de vista, o si estamos analizando las tareas que queremos enseñar desde un punto de vista de cantidad de términos, es mucho más fácil simplificar o complejizar más una tarea. Siempre buscando esa respuesta en la que el niño no va a aprender esas respuestas de forma memorística, sino que realmente va a poderlas generar él mismo. Bueno, y aquí es como, bueno, pues eso, incrementando la complejidad del estímulo, pero también la complejidad de la respuesta, hasta llegar a niveles donde realmente lo que le estamos preguntando es algo que está implícito en la respuesta, perdón, en el discriminativo, pero no está literalmente dicho en el discriminativo. Entonces, para mí, ya está como resumen, es una cosa de destacar, sobre todo la primera diapositiva me parece muy importante desde el punto de vista de que tenemos que analizar el componente de los estímulos, si eso es auditivo, si es visual, y buscar y ver qué respuesta le estoy pidiendo al niño, porque muchas veces nos vamos a trabajar desde un punto de vista simplemente auditivo, desde un punto de vista simplemente verbal, y es muy complejo para el niño. Y si nos quedamos en ese punto de vista exclusivamente auditivo, solo podemos referir al entrenamiento lingüístico, por encima de recurrir a estímulos menos complejos que realmente van a ayudar a que el niño pueda generar sus propias respuestas. Gracias por la flexibilidad. Gracias, ya. Adelante.
So when I was first trying to systematize this task analysis, you start to realize there's a continuum here. There's a continuum of how visual the answer is to the story. So how concrete the task is how visual the task is. And this is more concrete, it's a more direct visual task. And now, not only are there no cue words, but it's harder to visualize what somebody's doing when you're operating the Mario game. You can't really see where all your fingers are flying on the controller. So it's less visual and it gets more abstract. And again, there's not a dividing line between those are purely visual concrete tasks and these are purely auditory abstract tasks. But when you're struggling, child's struggling, it's something to pay attention to is where is the level of complexity this child can pay attention to. Is he purely visual? He has to be able to see exactly the answer. So your prompt for the answer is a visual expressive, or can your prompt be an auditory expressive that he can't see, and can he still then reach generative responding? So the real trick between whether this is the kind of rote non-generative task like the traditional social questions task, or if it's a truly generative comprehension task, is I'm moving to a whole new story at the same level of visualization, and I'm asking him a randomized question and he can answer correctly without relying on the direct prompting. So now that's all setting the stage then to get into some of our outcome data. And I'm making a dramatic switch now from just sort of laying out that language matrix process, getting us back to the social comprehension. And now I'm going to move into the outcome data. I can't stress enough that as we work with the language matrix, it's very easy for those programs to become more structured than they should be and retreat from the natural environment, because the natural environment is hard to control and manage. You know, a classic example is teaching a child to respond in large group activities. You can't go into the classroom and tell the teacher, well, he just failed, so let's repeat the last 3 minutes. It's not going to happen. So you tend to retreat into the more structured, controllable activities and then fail to generalize to the natural. And a lot of the natural, if it's ideal, going all the way back to almost the first thing I said, the ideal situation is not only are we teaching him the competence with these tasks, but we're establishing reinforcement control over his appropriate behavior and generalized observational learning. So now taking him into a natural activity, a playground down by the plaza, or going to the store, or going into a large group activity in the preschool. It's all just about managing reinforcement control, which we've already got established in more controllable situations. It's possible to go in as a shadow. We often do go in as a shadow into the natural situations and prompt in a very judicious manner, not over prompt, not under prompt, appropriate behavior in vivo. But it's a lot easier to go in and simply deliver accurate reinforcement for appropriate behavior as opposed to inappropriate behavior. So as long as we keep clear on, in our program, we haven't done the full job if we're only doing the structured programming. Our real job is establishing that effective 24-hour, 7-day-a-week schedule of reinforcement and raising the bar so that we don't have to reinforce them every 3 seconds, but we've thinned out the schedule, so we're only reinforcing them at the end of the large group activity. Then that sets the stage for being able to produce the kinds of outcomes that we're seeking. So we fortunately have Neil Martin here, who, what was the year of your first study?
28.
In 1998. You know, back in the 1990s, everyone was extremely excited about the promise of intensive early intervention. And a lot of us, I think, were operating somewhat on a missionary basis of, so long as we get people to do discrete trials or do ABA or do EIBI, everything will be wonderful. But Neil and colleagues analyzed a lot of the data of natural replications being done. Was it all in the UK or?
Yeah.
In the UK, and how many kids was it? Maybe
66.
66 kids, and actually found the outcomes weren't as great as we were all assuming they would be, because we're doing ABA. And Neil also did some effective analysis of, and what are the outcome measures that we're focusing on? And are we really focusing on the most legitimate outcome measures? Still, all that being said, was a set. Lovas had published his study in 1987, and then the National Institute of Mental Health in the United States around 1990 gave him a grant to see if what he had done at UCLA over 15 years, with only 2 or 3 kids at a time in his lab, could actually be replicated in more natural situations around the world. The NIMH did not fund the replications. They basically funded Lovas and a secretary and Tris Smith to analyze everybody else's data, but they didn't fund doing the intervention. They didn't fund collecting the data. So that it was a real struggle. There's probably 20 early intervention replication sites that came and went over the 90s to attempt to become a replication site, and only a handful actually secured local funding in their situation in order to be able to do a high level of intensity with a high level of quality control. And the quality control varied because of the funding. But we had in Modesto, California, where one of the local programs that handed out funding to families was situated, both Mila Amron Dickens set up a program, and Jane Howard and Colleen Sparkman were both set up replication sites, and Jane Howard's was more independent in Modesto, California. And because they had full funding, surprise, they both were able to produce outcome data. Svein Eikeseth in Norway was able to replicate with the constraint that Norway only covered kids starting at the age of 4. So his criteria for intake required an IQ of 50 or above, and older kids could be part of his study, whereas Amron Dickens and Howard's had younger children. This study isn't really replication, doesn't show data, this other study by Eikeseth and Associates in London, but it does a much better job of describing the treatment variables than does Eikeseth's 2007 report. And Jane Howard's program, she had first reported her results in the first year. Eikeseth had an earlier 1-year outcome, and so did Sallows. So Jane had published her results after about 1 year, I think, and then recently, 2014, published results on the same kids after 3 years. And Glenn Sallows also collected data on a large number of kids with a high level of intensity who published his 4-year outcomes. So I consider these the best arrangement, whereas just about all the other studies were reports of very constrained funded situations. These studies suggest maybe the best potential for the level of best outcomes. And what I emphasize in these studies is, and what everybody looks at, especially going back to Javier's discussion this morning, the funders tend to look at, well, what are the hours of one-to-one that were reported in these studies, and that's all we're going to cover. And they expect, again, as I said, students with 1 year of experience to be able to design sophisticated programs for their children and individualize without being covered for that work. But if you really look at each of these studies from the Lobos replication sites, not only did those studies report the one-to-one hours, but each of them also took pains to report the level of behavior analysis and supervision that was being conducted. 5 to 10 hours a week of supervision and analysis time being put in or more into each of those children's programs, which the funders tend to just ignore. Oh, well, that's a little detail. And same thing, each of these studies report parent training with a higher or lower level of quality of what they report. But they're reporting also that parents were a key part of the treatment when they were trained. So it wasn't just 40 hours a week in the basement with Billy, but it was training the parents to become experts at the behavior analysis and reinforcement of their children. And accountability, not just for the sake of producing research, but really to make sure that we're progressing the child through an intelligent, task-analyzed curriculum and systematically individualizing the child proceeds through treatment. Regular clinical reviews, often weekly, with the entire team, analyzing the child's data and making plans on a molecular basis for where to go in the next week. So all of these are, to me, the hallmarks of the best evidence-based treatment. And it's what we're attempting then to replicate, having been by benefit. It took us until 1999 to secure sufficient funding to replicate that kind of quality. But in the meantime, I learned from all the mistakes of the programs that came and went over the 90s. This is too much detail to go into today, but this chart is an attempt to summarize all the main findings that are reported in all of the studies. And one thing that's so vexing in all these outcome studies is the tendency is to focus on standardized assessments because they're more objective data that can be reported about children than the behavioral data, because we don't have high quality, standardized, direct observational data of children that the general community would accept. So there's a million problems. As I could invite Neil up, you want to just start talking about the problems with standardized assessment? Or Javier could also come up, talk about your choice of an instrument and the problems of assessing children at the tails on a normal distribution. But what I look at these results as is a social validity measure. So I might say that a child's recovered in our program at my child's family's home. They're performing normal social comprehension skills and their behavior's under control and they play appropriately with mutual friends. But how do they do when I take them down to the university autism clinic and they have to wait all day to get an IQ test from some stranger that doesn't reinforce them? It's like the acid test. Every parent hates taking their child to the doctor, where all the other kids are crying, including my own, and stressed out and doesn't want to see the doctor because he's going to get a shot. Children that can perform at a high level at a clinic in an institutionalized setting, that's a social validity measure, both because it's meaningful to the lay public that understands these standardized assessments and the traditional field, but it's also a hardcore measure of whether the child can generalize appropriate responding to a natural activity or an unnatural natural activity. And then, of course, as Javier was alluding to, and others also are recognizing, we don't just have to pin our hopes on these large-scale group studies, but we can also be looking at single subject research as evidence for the fundamental importance of what we're doing. And if you look at the BACB's publication on standards for autism, we took pains to point out that a lot of research can be evaluating focused interventions. So instead of trying to evaluate reinforcement of a child over in the groups, group comparison, reinforcement of 30 children over 2 years compared with 30 other children not being reinforced. Here we're looking at single subject studies that are maybe shorter term and much more focused on a certain problem behavior like self-stimulatory behavior or spontaneous language. And are we really showing that we have this body of single subject research to build on with this more social validity research that looks at these large scale standardized assessments? So from my point of view, we want to have both and. We want to make sure we've got all the single subject studies showing that when you zoom in and look in more in a focus setting with a specific child that we know what we're doing. And then when you put together a large group of data and collect these more general standardized assessments, does that also show an obvious difference between the kids getting our treatment and kids getting a different form of treatment? So we grew up and we cut our teeth on single subject ABA studies within subject ABA results. They're the most significant results that taught us what we were doing and talking about. So we're not only looking at the global outcome measures, we're really examining that specific impact on children. And when you look at the going all the way back to Lobos, Cagle, Simmons, and Long in 1973, reporting their results of the institutional work in the 1960s, that study doesn't graph this graph out. This is my recreation, but there's really a comparison of different kinds of kids getting different kinds of treatment. There's a group of children that did not have parent involvement at all. They started in the institution, they stayed in the institution. A group of children who got parent training and were transitioned back to their home during treatment, and a group of children who started in their home and stayed in their home and got parent training. And they got different outcomes in those different basic treatment models. So again, the study itself, as you read it, implies that it's more this large group molar analysis of what happened, but the details are in there showing better results the more the parent involvement in the program. And so Lobos also, again, shows the more group comparison. So this is 1987 study where he's comparing intensive behavior therapy, the average of 40 hours a week, with moderate behavior therapy in his own clinic, getting an average of 10 hours a week, with eclectic treatment, which he was forced to collect by the reviewers at the Journal of Clinical and Consulting Psychology. Lobos originally submitted just this study to them, and they rejected it and said they really wanted an additional group comparison. So he's fortunate that at UCLA, the blinking out her name, the psychologist did a lot of the assessments. Freeman was also collecting data on another 60 or so kids. So they matched the 21 kids in her data collection that most matched Lobos's kids and created this third group, and which to me is quite convincing because it's not even randomized, it's better than randomized. These kids had no shot at being selected into that group, but they're at least matched to the group. Although there's statistical problems with matching as well as a control group. But anyway, what everybody pays attention to this large group data based on standardized measures, although this also includes 2 social validity measures, which is not qualifying for the diagnosis, and being able to graduate from a grade in school. But hidden in Lobos's data, and not all of it was published even, is more individual child-by-child behavior data. So at the baselines for all this data is in here, and then Lobos reported the outcomes separately, showing the number of children who had dramatic play at baseline, and the number of children that had dramatic play mastered. And this is out of this group of 19 kids that finished intensive treatment. The number of kids that had complex play, and then at outcome at 3 years, the number of kids that had pure play at intake, outcome, the number of kids that were already in the normal IQ range at outcome, 9 kids that reached best outcomes, and also negative behaviors, the number of kids that were diagnosed with severe mental retardation at intake and outcome, who had stereotype behavior, had tantrums, and were mute. So there's all this individual by individual data too that most people don't attend to in Lobos's research. And then, today now, there's even more following on the work that Javier was reporting on this morning, and the work from Reichau and Volkmar and others. There's more acceptance that what we really want to do is come up with meta-analyses, so to speak, using that term very loosely, of all the individual ABA interventions that are being used, and is there sufficient evidence to support parent-implemented intervention or peer-mediated instruction or discrete trial teaching. So these more focused treatment packages. So this is the North Carolina group that studied evidence-based practices and found there was sufficient evidence for these focused treatments. The National Autism Center independently did the same thing. And I haven't even included it yet, but recently the Ontario Association for Behavior Analysis also did an extensive study. A lot of it was focused on replicating or evaluating the results of these two, but going into more detail. And then there's all the meta-analyses, which I was assuming Javier would cover well enough so I didn't have to go into. But what we're really looking at now is what's the social validity of these results. One interesting finding, Deborah Fine in Connecticut is studying children who reached optimal outcome. So she's soliciting kids to the clinic, her clinic for evaluation to really discover, are these kids reaching that level of best outcomes where they're really functioning as normal children? and she's calling them optimal outcomes kids. So she's got this group of 34 children. She's published about 7 or 8 papers on this group of 34 children, showing that they clearly, objectively had autism earlier in their history, and now they no longer meet the criteria, showing it's not a pipe dream that kids can reach the best outcomes level. And did a follow-up where they were really looking at what were the factors that led to the results. And so in this case, they had concrete enough data on 25 of the optimal outcome children to compare them with 34 other children that weren't that had a diagnosis at outcome of high functioning autism. So they didn't reach optimal outcome. And in their comparison, so what were the factors that separated out the two groups? They found that substantially more of the optimal outcome children received quote unquote applied behavior analysis therapy, and substantially more of the high functioning children had not received applied behavior analysis therapy, but instead had been treated with antipsychotics and antidepressants. So really showing a very different level of outcome based upon the kind of environmental work. Also, the optimal outcome kids, the parents identified autism earlier and referred them for treatment earlier. So that's all setting the stage for, so what are we doing? And so we're now I've got to update this once again. This is all our preliminary data. So I'm still checking a lot of this for reliability, and I've got a lot of data that we haven't even summarized yet. But as of the end of 2014, we had started as the Lobos Institute in 2003, even though we're operating under two different programs in the 90s in Minnesota. We had, by 2014, we had substantial enough data on 176 of our children. There's actually more than 200 at that point that we've seen, but the remaining 19, or actually this is 19 out of the 176, the 19 of the kids either had not completed 6 months of treatment or hadn't accessed sufficient baseline or outcome evaluations to count their data. 24 of the kids were still in treatment as of December 2014. But we basically have the remainder, we have these 3 groups. One group is the group of 48 children who met either the intake criteria for Lobos 1987 plus 2 months, or the met the criteria for the IPSA study, the older children with an IQ over 50. Another 37 children who also met those criteria but got the workshop model or the family consultation model. So this was more the group that Neil had studied in the UK of, we were delivering the supervision and the training to the family, but we weren't hiring the staff for them and training the staff, or providing training staff, but we were providing training in the family consultation. Then another 48 kids that were getting the solid assessments, but were older or their IQs were lower than to qualify for the EIBI. So got this group we're working on analyzing all the data of. And so what have we been able to do? I'm going to try to make sure I finish by 2 o'clock, and then when we start the hands-on, I'll finish up some of this data that I don't get to right now. But anyway, when we look at what we're doing in our program is we're providing an extensive analysis every 6 months of the child's progress. We're spending about 36 hours in evaluation and analysis every 6 months of each of our children, and reporting that data to the parents and helping the parents make plans for the next 6 months. And as a result, the total hours, we're individualizing the total hours per week. So for just the 48 EIBI children, the total hours that we're billing to the local Minnesota funders, the mode is 45 hours a week of services for, and this is the number of children. So 18 children are getting on average 45 hours a week from intake to discharge. And some children are averaging, 2 children are only averaging 5 hours a week. 1 child's averaging 60 hours a week. So there's quite a variability. This is based on the 6-month evaluation and planning process. And there's a ramp up. So generally when a child starts, the first 2 months are low on hours. They hit maximum hours for the next 2 years, and then they're faded down to about a quarter of those hours for the last year of treatment, the last third of treatment. So that's the distribution of hours that they're getting, both supervision and one-to-one. So here's just the one-to-one hours. So now the mode is 26 children are averaging 30 hours a week throughout the overall course of treatment for 3 years. And 40 children are averaging 20 hours a week of supervision. So they're getting the weekly assessment, the analysis, the parent training time by the clinical supervisor and the senior, and staff training time. So this is separate from the one-to-one time of the children, but this is the amount of training time being put in. And all expressed as billable hours. So there are certain things that our funders don't pay for, which is like the intake training of the staff. So that's additional non-billable hours. But this is what is comparable to the outcome studies that I was showing a little bit ago. And another reflection of our individualization is the length of treatment. So this is one child was only treated for 6 months. 6 kids were treated for 12 months. The mode is 13 children being treated for 36 months, and 3 kids being treated for more than 60 months. So the average length of treatment is 34 months, but it's a huge distribution. So when we go back and look at the social validity assessment, then what Lobos had was 9 of 19 children had reached best outcomes, with 2 children dropping out. Where in effect all those other numbers are all of our dropouts. But of our 48 kids, we had 33 of 48 reaching those criteria, which is the normal IQ. They're able to go to school without requiring a one-to-one aid, and they're no longer meeting the criteria for autism. And that's with a little asterisk there, because these days the DSM won't even allow you to remove a diagnosis of autism. The best you can say is in remission, which reflects common standards in clinical practice in the US. It's very hard to find anybody to remove the diagnosis, although their report will say it doesn't meet any of the criteria, but they still have autism. So then this compares our 3 groups. So here's the group I was just showing, 33 of 48 reaching the best outcomes. In the EIBI, here's the family consultation group, similar to Glenn Sallow's study or the UK study. And 9 of those 37 children reached best outcomes. And of our older children, 2 of 48 reached best outcomes. So we're seeing those results occasionally for the older children, but certainly not as much. And then I've got more detailed data, but it's 2 o'clock, so we'll pick up with some of this when we come back for things. Thank you.